leveraging over 10 years experience in the investment banking, corporate finance world.
I grew up in a town of about 85.
85 people. I think my road had 85 people. We hit London, the bright lights of London.
So it was a real sort of 360 for me.
You jump into boutique investment banking, corporate finance, and advising multi-million pound deals. I mean, how does that transition work even further?
Salaries are pretty high, but if you're working 100 or 120 hours a week, you're actually working 3 weeks every week compared to a normal job.
When you were going into salary negotiations, promotion negotiations, that spectre of the visa before you got permanent residency.
I also don't have Oxbridge or anything like that, so it's by no means the end of the road if that's not the case.
Yeah. What's the boutique bank giving you that maybe the bulge bracket doesn't?
When people are trying to get into the industry, having the perfect CV that you're sort of flinging off into a mix, that's not the right way to do it. If you just do that one thing, I think that's the secret.
Welcome. We've got the amazing Matthew King here. First guest. Thank you very much. Really appreciate you. Thank you very much for spending time with us this afternoon.
Cheers.
And really, the podcast here is to share the stories of some of our wonderful clients, some of our wonderful contacts. And Matthew King here has got an unbelievable story we're really happy to share with you. He's the founder of M. King & Co. Founded 2 years ago now, Matt. You're 2 years into your entrepreneurial journey. And M. King & Co. is a boutique advisory firm advising clients all over the world with respect to their financial matters, their business strategy matters. And you're leveraging over 10 years experience in the investment banking, corporate finance world here in London. And no doubt those clients are well served. So, or maybe most of them. I'm sure they'll have something to say. But first things first, because we've got a few traditions here, even though we've just started. I know it's episode 1, but we're going to have traditions on this podcast. And the first tradition is, we're going to have a surprise question for you. We told you that you've got a surprise question, but you don't know what the question is.
I've been sweating bullets about this.
Yeah, but it's nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about. So we want to start things off with an interesting question. An interesting question which says, what's the biggest screw up that you've had to date? And how did you recover?
It's an interesting question. But I think I've been really fortunate in that I think every time I've had a setback or a challenge, it's just been a learning opportunity for something, that's come later and greater. I could say, I took a year, for instance, after I left my sort of full-time job, sort of trying to figure out what I was doing. Looking back, sort of time wasted, but, I learned a huge amount in that year. So I think that would sort of be the most costly error I made. A year is a long time, but I think at the same time I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. So I don't regret it at all. But it was maybe one of my more costly learning experiences.
Yeah, most learning experiences are, unfortunately.
Unfortunately,
but that's why they're learning experiences.
Indeed.
But first things first, you're Canadian, which is exciting, I think, on most fronts. But you're not from mainland Canada. You're from Newfoundland.
That's right.
Talk to me about Newfoundland. What is it?
Well, Newfoundland is... it's difficult maybe to do a direct comparison to somewhere in the UK. Maybe Anglesey would be the closest or something like that. But it's an island off the coast on the Atlantic side. It's pretty big. It's about the size of England.
Okay.
The population of just 500,000 people. And so... a lot of those postcards that you might see from Canada with the sort of icebergs or the whales spouting up into the water, mountains, forests, all of that sort of unspoiled nature. That's painting a very accurate picture of home. But I grew up in a town of about 85.
85 people.
85 people.
Wow.
About 200 miles from the closest airport. And so, the nature's fantastic. The people are so warm, so open. It's a beautiful place. But, in terms of connectivity, in terms of, maybe some of the cultural things that come with sort of bigger centers, you're a little bit more remote there, I might say.
Oh gosh. And then you moved from Newfoundland to Madrid, which is where you studied. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I'd always had this idea that I wanted to work in the financial industry, and I did an undergraduate degree also back in Newfoundland, and sort of sent the CV around, and I think the feedback I got was more or less sort of, you know, this is not sort of a school that we're familiar with, etc. It's a very competitive industry. And so then I thought, right, I'll go and do a master's degree. And I also thought very ambitiously, I'll go and learn Spanish. So I did a 1 year's master's program in Madrid. And the first sign that maybe I hadn't done enough due diligence on that decision is I arrived in July of 2011. And the door of the plane opened. I still remember to this day, as a sort of Canadian for his entire life, arriving, the door of the plane opens. It was 45 degrees in Madrid that day. And I got hit in the face as if I just opened the door to the oven or something. And I thought, oh dear, First I thought there was a machine nearby exhausting or something. I said, no, this is the temperature. And so, I settled in there. I didn't learn a whole lot of Spanish, but, really sort of putting roots down on this side of the Atlantic. Had an incredible year, learned a lot in my master's program, made some of, the friends I still have today in that program, and then sort of, had a much better network and background to then get into the industry I later on wanted to do. Although it was a pretty easy choice that I needed somewhere a little bit less warm and maybe a little bit more English language. And so London was a very natural choice, and I'm still here today.
That's amazing, because how did you make that transition from a village of 85 people to a city like Madrid with skyscrapers and millions of people?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way it was good that it was such a big change. It was a different language, it was a different climate, it was a city. So everything was so different that it was quite obvious to everyone that I was dealing with that I was not from there. Not, I wasn't a Spanish speaker. I obviously wasn't from a city, and so people didn't expect me to really know what was going on, which is great because I absolutely didn't. I still remember going out with some friends of mine, and we were on the way back. Students sort of been a rowdy dinner, whatever, and everyone's like, oh, that was a really nice restaurant. One of the best ceviches I'd had, and I was there going, this is crazy, guys. This is the first time I've ever been on a train. And I was 24, I think, at the time, and so just a difference in it was also my first ceviche, by the way, and so I found that much less noteworthy. To me, it was like a fish dish, but the train had blown my mind, which to most people, of course, living in London or even most of Europe, not many things are more pedestrian than taking a train, but to me it was like a roller coaster. So it was a real period of adjustment. But, I loved it. One of the things I've always been a huge fan of is culture and history. And, as I said, I love Newfoundland. The people are incredible. The nature is incredible. But if you love cultural diversity, if you love history, for me, a place like Europe just has so much more on offer from that perspective. And so when I got here, in Madrid, you've got the Prado Museum, you've got all kinds. You've got the food scene in Madrid. You've got all these people from all over the world studying in a master's program. It completely blew my mind, and I was sort of hooked.
Yeah.
Other than the climate.
So, from Newfoundland, spend your whole life there. Travel much at all, or were you very much strictly in Newfoundland?
We used to do the sort of traditional summer holidays and things like that. So I think I've been once to Florida for a couple of weeks when I was 8 or 9. Sometimes we drive as far as Toronto, or I think once we even went to Boston. But, sort of, you probably could count on your fingers the number of times that I was off the island. So it was, not particularly well traveled, although I'd sort of been around a little bit, but it was certainly a huge change. I mean, I wouldn't say that I felt comfortable in a big big urban environment before arriving in Madrid. So it was a real sort of 360 for me.
That's insane. So we're in Newfoundland, undergrad, did masters at Madrid, loved it. I'm sure plenty of things as well, not just the train rides. And then we hit London, the bright lights of London, the balance of the weather, which I can't believe I'm saying that as a Londoner myself, but the weather was a bonus. And you jump into boutique investment banking, corporate finance, doing and advising multi-million pound deals. I mean, how does that transition work even further?
Yeah, it's interesting that I think after that year for me was really quite transformative. Going to Madrid, where I didn't have any family network, no friends, sort of complete reinvention. And so then, actually, in a way, although I still had no real connections in London at that time,
Mm.
at least the language was the same. The food was more similar. The even some of the ways of life were sort of more familiar. And so for me, settling in was relatively easy from a cultural perspective, although there are a few sort of, niggling differences that I'll tell you a little bit about later. But, for the most part, it was about getting into the industry. Investment banking is quite competitive. And so getting in, and then once you're in, sort of making sure that you're doing everything you can to sort of rise to the top, etc., sort of took all of my time. So, I got there, I got a room, I got an internship, I sort of got, I was living as close as I could to the office because, you're just sort of leaving to just get a few hours of sleep and head back type of thing. And so, I lived in London for probably 4 or 5 years before I really had enough personal free time to actually start exploring the city in any real way. And so, I'd sort of say the period from 25 to 30 was really sort of all about, all about focusing on the career.
Yeah.
And so as much as I love London absolutely to death, in those 5 years, gosh, I really wasn't doing much in the way of fun or socializing. I didn't have existing, friends or family here. And so that was sort of not a part of my life that I focused on a huge amount at first. And it was only sort of over the course of years, actually, that at first, people that I'd met at work, and then once you start sort of doing more social activities, you then start building out the network and then actually sort of developing proper friends and things like that and sort of settling in. But I think London's quite an interesting place in that it's so cosmopolitan that, I guess people don't really sort of need to know that much about your story, in the nicest possible way. If you're from England and you arrive in Newfoundland, everyone's going to want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
They're going to want to know your story. They're going to know why you've arrived, just because it's unusual, Whereas here, you could be from somewhere far more exotic than Canada, and people won't look twice. And so, in that sense, I think it was really easy for me to settle in. It's one of the things I love most about London. It's really a melting pot from all over the world.
Yeah. And you mentioned something really interesting there, that getting into the industry is the difficult bit. And you got in through an internship. So how did you get that internship? What was the process? Was it competitive? Was it through a connection? What was it like?
It was, it was a competitive process. Even to get on the interviewing schedule required a certain connection. And so looking back, one of the analysts that they'd recently hired had been a classmate of mine. Okay. And he had been hired because one of the directors on that team had recently finished his MBA at the same business school in Madrid where I'd studied the year before. And so, he then hired an intern from the same school who was a classmate of mine. He then turned around and sort of, opened the door again for another intern to come in behind. And so, indirectly getting in the door was sort of through that network.
Yeah. And that's the power of doing the masters at the Madrid, right? Where your undergrad at Newfoundland, whilst it probably gave you the knowledge to, do the masters and beyond, but actually the network at Madrid ultimately helped you to the bright lights of London.
Absolutely. My sort of specialization in my undergraduate had been finance. And so, a lot of the theory and things I'd already learned in my undergraduate when I went to IE in Madrid. But yeah, exactly. Having that sort of network that really allows you to open the doors. That's really what makes, the theory is important, but to sort of rise to the top and get in and actually grab a position, you generally need some way to stand out from the other, 50 or 100 applications that have been made. So having some sort of angle is very often important.
Yeah, because the door's ajar, but it's not fully open for you to walk through. You've still got to perform, you've still got to interview, you've still got to impress your the fellow people that you work with and the business owner. So I think what's really important for people listening that want to get into the investment banking industry is that you've got your bulge brackets, your big guys that have vigorous processes and test after test and applications and all the rest of it. On the more boutique level, yes, there's one or two connections, but that isn't the job. That's just, well, have a look at these guys. Did you ever consider a bulge bracket initially, or did you see that connection and take it with both hands?
Well, I did consider a bulge bracket. And I mean, frankly, what it came down to, just being completely candid, is when I arrived, the first internship that I found was with this firm, and when I got in there, I really loved it, and so decided not to leave. And so, for me, it was as simple as that. Looking back, I'm really pleased that things worked out like that, and I wish I could take credit for having sort of had some strategic plan at the time that led me in that direction. However, in reality, it was mostly just good luck.
Yeah. Well, that's a huge element of it, right? And what's really powerful is that you said between the ages of 25 and 30. So you've got energy, you've got focus. Obviously, don't have any children unless you want to tell them something now. But you're utterly focused on getting through that internship, working your ass off, getting the hard skills. Is that what's really required to break into that? Really into that kind of industry, pushing through the analyst program and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's two ways to look at it. There are some places where I think you can probably have a better sort of work-life balance. I wouldn't say it's ever particularly good, but it could be better maybe than my own experience. But at the same time, just the way that entire industry is structured, salaries are pretty high. But, if you're working 100 or 120 hours a week or something like that, you're actually working 3 weeks every week compared to a normal job. And so, my recommendation is, don't get into that industry to do the first 5 or 6 years. Either get in there because you want to take the skills and then go and do something else, or get in there because you want to get through the first 5 or 6 years and then get into sort of the next phase of the career where you're sort of, the pay starts increasing more and actually your workload starts decreasing because it's more about project management, it's more about client interaction, etc. And so, my recommendation is if it's something that someone wants to do, to make the most out of it, I would approach it to sort of be willing to sort of put most of your time into sort of doing the experience and being the best that you can be at doing that job.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people are motivated to get into the investment banking world because of, well, probably two main things. One is the network it gives you. So even at any level, bulge bracket or boutique, working with some hopefully great clients, great people across your peer group, you never know where they're going to go. So if you're at massive bulge bracket, your JP Morgans, your Goldman Sachs, etc., your peer group should go on to do something pretty interesting, either within the bank or beyond. So just getting into that ecosphere is just a win in itself.
Yeah.
The other elements are, of course, the money. And we've talked about motivations before, I know. But is money that something that motivates you? As you saw the nice big salaries and maybe the bigger bonuses and thought, I'll have a bit of that? Or was it something else that motivated you to get into the financial IB world?
I mean, I think for me, to be honest, I don't have much of a, luxury lifestyle. I don't have a lot of expensive hobbies or things like that. And so it was never really the need for money to fund a lifestyle that drove me. I think what I always did have was sort of a need to excel, a need for accomplishment. And so the idea that, this was, I was never particularly gifted at athletics. I was asthmatic. So the idea of sort of going into, try and become an athlete or to join the military or anything like that, I thought was off the table. So in terms of, an office type job, basically the thing that seemed to me the most difficult thing to do was this. And I said, okay, well, if I want to do something and really prove to myself that I can do it, this seems like the sort of ultimate way to sort of go and test yourself. Which again, looking back is maybe not the best way to take that decision. But again, it does give you so many options later on in your life. If you go and you do something like that of, a high commitment career where you rapidly gain new skills, you rapidly increase your network with high value individuals, you're actually laying the groundwork for future success.
Yeah, and talking about groundwork, so at the bulge bracket, we know that there's a lot of formal training, there's a lot of sort of doing your bit to kind of get through the program, a lot of hard work, a lot of formatting. But once you punch through the sort of 2 years analyst program, you've got, or maybe 3 years in some cases, you've got that sort of brand name behind you, you've got the work ethic behind you, you've got, as you say, just being part of that ecosphere and that recognition. At a boutique bank, what's the difference there? Like, why? I know that this was got through that because of an opportunity that came your way, but what's the boutique bank giving you that maybe the bulge bracket doesn't?
Yeah, I mean it's a really good question, and I personally think that the experience is quite different. For some of your listeners who may not know, boutique is just a smaller version basically of the bulge bracket, more established, big banks, the international famous, Goldman Sachs, etc. Boutiques can vary hugely, but the one that I worked in was generally around 20 people teams. And so a very small team. And so when you're working on projects, even at a junior level, in my experience, you got a lot more exposure to the client. You got a lot more exposure to overall project management in terms of what's going on, compared to, a bigger bank where they might be staffing it with a much bigger team who are working on multiple things. And so, your exposure or your responsibility on a project could be something quite narrow and quite niche. Whereas at a boutique level, effectively your most limited resource is always people.
Yeah.
And so almost every level at the organization is happy and even trying to give as much responsibility as they can to the layer below. And so I think at the end, my take on it would be effectively go to a boutique if you're looking for, a broader experience, a more rapid sort of maybe exposure to the full end-to-end process. And, even if you stick it out sort of beyond that initial period and sort of spend a few more years, I think what you'll find is your network begins to develop much more quickly because you end up being in front of clients much more quickly.
Yes, yeah.
And when you are building that network and that brand, it's more of a personal network and a personal brand. When someone takes a meeting with JP Morgan, they're generally most interested in the fact that it's JP Morgan. Whereas, when you're coming from a boutique bank, the brand is obviously not as strong. And so if they're taking the meeting, they're largely taking it because they know you and your reputation individually, which is sort of an investment in your own, personal brand, as it were.
Yeah, which, I mean, to peel it back, we'll explore this a bit later, but to peel it back into M. King & Co., that's actually quite interesting why it's named M. King & Co. is because your personal brand has grown over the 10, 11, 12 years that you've been working in the industry, so that when people now take meetings with you, it's because of what you've built working at a boutique bank rather than necessarily at a bulge bracket. Do you think that, for listeners that are trying to get into the investment banking world, because it's still attractive, and in the UK, bankers' bonuses have been sort of uncapped now, so
That's right.
the sort of days of big money potentially could come back. I mean, not saying that what they're paid now is not big money; it's all relative, I guess. But would you say to someone, actually go to the bulge bracket, get the formal training, and then jump into boutique and do something, or to go your route, start with the boutique, get those early skills on the soft side and the hard side, work your ass off across everything, and just kind of muscle through the first 5 years, and then you've got a personal brand to speak of, or something else?
I mean, for me, there would be two big considerations. The first being what you want to do at the end. The second being sort of how long the investment banking stage of that journey is going to be. If you're going to spend 2 or 3 years in investment banking, then move on to do something else, my suggestion would be to go to a bulge bracket bank if you can get in. You'll have that sort of brand on your CV forever. Just walking into almost any industry in the world. If you could finish the Goldman Sachs analyst program, that already says something, and you'll sort of carry that with you then for the rest of your career, whether that's as an entrepreneur, as an employee in another industry, whatever the case may be. And also, I think in other industries, it just gives you a lot of optionality.
Yeah.
One of the things I think, while I took the boutique route, and I'm very happy with that choice, lots of industries like private equity, etc., they have a strong preference for bulge bracket backgrounds. And so I think what you'll find is most people in the more general industry, if they're looking for someone with an investment banking background, maybe they won't have a preference between a bulge bracket or a boutique. And then you have some industries that are more sort of, preferential towards the bulge bracket. So if you're doing a short stint, I would say just try and get into a bulge bracket if you can. You'll get good training in a structured format. You'll have a brand that stays on your CV for the rest of your career, and you'll have the most sort of exit options when you sort of go to leave. If you're sort of more interested in either project management or actually learning about the investment banking industry, you're willing to maybe sort of spend 4 or 5 years in the industry, at that point I would have more of an interest in exploring the boutique side of things, because you will get more exposure more quickly. And if you put more time and enough time to start building some relationships, etc., then I think you actually start to get some of those dividends of earlier exposure to clients, etc., from working in the boutique side. So I think people need to know what they want out of it to try and then make the right decision. Although, again, realistically, it's a very competitive industry. If you can get offers from a bunch of different banks and you've got to make a choice, that's a very good place. That's a great problem to have. But otherwise, just getting in is for me the most difficult bit. And so, that's where I would focus most of my time. The difference between them, maybe one is better than the other in certain things, but getting in at all for me is the biggest challenge.
Yeah. Are they really that good? Because I know you've worked with them when you're running books and fundraising. I know you've battled against them when you're representing your clients. Are they really that good?
Investment banks?
Yeah. Well, the big guys, the bulge brackets. You can say no.
It's. I don't want to say anything negative about the big banks. Actually, I think that what they offer is fundamentally sort of different from what a boutique offers. Really, most of the bulge bracket banks are built around having a big balance sheet. So when people want access to capital, or they want access to, debt financing, what they really want is a team that has all the networks, all these sort of clients on, that are able to go out and secure them hundreds of millions or billions of pounds in finance when they need it. And then sort of all the M&A advice and things like that, they sort of put on to try and, maintain ownership of a client relationship. Whereas the boutique model, generally you don't have people who, you don't have your own balance sheet. You don't have your own funds to sort of invest or buy. So all that you're doing is you're a specialist in giving advice. And so, I think it would be maybe... there's certainly meetings where I've gone into maybe meetings with people on the other side who are maybe more structural thinkers, who are more, interested in a process, more interested in, going through the hoops, which you could characterize as being less creative, etc. But, it's a different machine. It's a different type of beast. And I think when you look at it in that context, the service that they provide is very difficult. It can't be completely replaced by a boutique. Today, I have no regrets on how things have panned out. And I think, if I had left the industry earlier, without having sort of done the networking that I was able to do and built the relationships that I was able to build, then I would have been probably, without the same brand power that I would have had in a bulge. So if I had left, halfway through that stint that I did, probably that would have not made the most of my time. As it was, I think I put in the time that was necessary, and I was very fortunate with the clients that I was able to work with, that I was able to sort of build out a good network. And so for me, I think it's really worked out sort of for the best. But, to work in a bulge bracket, it would have provided a little bit of, cachet on the CV potentially. But I think at my age and for the type of work I do now, it doesn't really have much of an impact.
Yeah, because I guess it's not going to be overt, right? They're not going to say, we won't take this meeting with you because you didn't go to one of those banks. They'll look at your, as you say, the branding that you've built over the years and decide whether they should. Now, if you're working with a boutique bank that does have a very good owner, they're well known, and they've got that excellent brand name, which I know you did, then that's kind of washed away. So I don't want to push sort of listeners down boutique over bulge over boutique. I think they both have excellent pros and some cons to think about as part of your journey. And you just, I think what I'm hearing you saying is plan a few steps ahead so that you can select one or the other. Obviously subject to getting in, because that's the hard bit. So I know acceptance rates at bulge brackets, so it must be in the single digits, if anything. Yeah. So it's hard, it's difficult, but that's just, it's the same with boutiques, right? As you said, there's 50, 100 applicants for one or two positions. I mean, do the maths, that's single digit percentages as well. So it's difficult, challenging. But do you think that working at a boutique, do you think that you've ever missed out on a meeting or an opportunity because you didn't have that background? Or would you never know? Is it too hypothetical to talk about?
I mean, I think now at the age that I am, with the experience that I've got, because I think, look, if you work for 3 years and basically what you've spent most of your time doing is working in spreadsheets, in PowerPoints, etc., then, people knowing that, you went to one of these internationally recognized banks and you had the training program, it's a label of consistency. It's sort of a sign of quality. Whereas if you've done it at a boutique, it could be a good boutique or maybe not. Yeah. So maybe the training was excellent or maybe not. By the time you've done it for a decade or 12 years or however long I was there, at that point you can walk out and say, well, I did, transactions with this client, this client, this client, and they were successful transactions, and you could call them and you can ask them and see what they think. And I think at that point, the label under which you're working becomes much less important. And so I think for me now, there's not really, that much that I've missed out on. I mean, you'll never sort of know the counterfactual. Maybe if those 10 or 12 years had been spent in a big bank, the deals would have been even more interesting and even more exciting. And other than that very hypothetical scenario, I don't think today anyone sort of goes, oh, well, you've worked on really relevant things to my business, but you didn't do it under this wrapper, so I'm not interested. I've never sort of even had a hint of that, to be honest.
Yeah, well, a deal's the deal, right? And to your point earlier around more junior members at boutique banks doing more, actually you've probably ended up doing more on certain deals than perhaps your peers at a similar age. So to a large extent, you've cut your teeth on a lot of those great deals. Maybe one or two deals at the bulge brackets might have an extra zero at the end, but other than that, I mean, as you said before, you have worked with the bulge brackets in joint books and fundraisers and in different bits of advice. So I think it's a really interesting debate that listeners who want to get into the IB world really have to have a plan around that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And, there's a little bit of rivalry sometimes between, and I think, and for good reason, it's incredibly competitive to get into some of these bulge bracket banks. And so I understand that, the people who are in there, sometimes look at, others and, they feel pride in being part of those organizations, and rightly so. But similarly, I think the work is not fundamentally different, and the things that you're learning are not fundamentally different, and you get more exposure at an earlier level. The one thing I would say, and the reason that maybe there's sometimes more of a preference for these bigger banks, is there's more variability between the boutiques. They're not big brands, so there are good ones and there are not good ones, and unless someone's familiar with your specific boutique, it won't necessarily have the same automatic recognition. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to get the same or even better exposure and sort of training and learning experiences at a boutique bank.
Yeah.
And actually, as I said before, for me, the number one priority is actually trying to map it against what you want to do. And actually, one of the other things that, when people are trying to get into the industry, they tell me that they want to work in a bank. And to me, that's sort of not really the right way of thinking about it. If you want to sort of work in such a competitive field, the idea that you'd send off your application to Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, whatever, and just hope to sort of get into the interview process. It's not impossible, but I mean, for me, it'd be a lot more impactful to actually look within the teams. What do you want to do specifically? Do you want to work in capital markets? Would you like to work in research? Would you like to work in M&A, credit? What team would you like to work at? Even try and ideally find on LinkedIn or wherever the case may be, through an alumni network, whatever you can, the person that you would like to work for. Find the managing director that you would like to be your boss internally, and try and reach out to him, explain to him or her why you want to work for them in that job, your motivation, your experience, your ambition for the future. Because again, if you're trying to stand out, the idea that you're just applying to some organization with hundreds of thousands of people and just sort of trying to deal with that at that level, to me, that's not the right way to do it. Try to make it personal. Explain why you want to be in that part of that business, and you'll get a lot more traction, in my experience. In fact, I had a friend of mine, he's also from Newfoundland, and he moved here. And when he first came, he was working in a pub. And then he got a job as an intern in a very small boutique, but it wasn't particularly active. They didn't have a lot of deal flow. And in the end, he did this exercise of mapping out where he wanted to work. And he sent them letters in the post, because he didn't have their emails, but he could easily find out where the bank's addresses were. So he wrote a letter on paper, printed it out, addressed it to this guy, and sent it off, explaining why he wanted to work there, doing this job. He heard that he was hiring. And actually, that's the perfect way sort of around the HR filter, because, no one sends paper letters anymore.
Correct.
And he ended up getting the job. And so, these types of things where you show as part of the application that you're a creative thinker, that you go the extra mile, that you do what it takes to get the outcome that you want, that's actually much better than, just having the perfect CV that you're sort of flinging off into a mix, because there's going to be, thousands of Oxbridge or Ivy League or, European equivalent applicants with great GPAs and everything. It's really difficult to stand out just on academics. So showing a bit of proactivity, showing a bit of creativity, showing a bit of drive, those to me are the things that can really help someone get noticed,
stand out in that application. Because I mean, we're deep diving into the application process, because it is a challenge for a lot of people to not just word the application the right way, but before you even send that off, you've got to be preparing for a whole bunch of psychometric tests and all that kind of stuff. And I know I've definitely done some weird and wonderful tests when applying for some of the bigger guys across the board, and whether you pass them or not, you're not really quite sure why. I mean, unless there's a maths one, because that's obviously definitive. The other was you've no clue.
Exactly.
So what, other than the sort of things that you said, on the application itself, what can people really do if they don't have an Oxbridge, if they don't have your sort of standout bit? What can they be doing to show the IB or show their employer they really want to work there and they can punch through the application?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, and I also don't have Oxbridge or anything like that, so, it's by no means the end of the road if that's not the case. But I think what you want to demonstrate is a clear commitment that this is not one CV that you're sending out to a bank, but you're also sending some others out to, marketing agencies. That it's just one plan amongst many. And what you really want is a job. You want to be very clear that what I want is this job. This is the job I want. If I get it, I'll do everything I can to do it well, and to really show that commitment. And so things like going out and taking modeling training courses, financial modeling, exactly. Being out on the runway is probably not that typical in investment banking. So exactly, financial modeling, brushing up your skills with PowerPoints, and again, sort of doing courses that have a certification, so you can demonstrate that I've done the training. Even doing sample research papers depending on the industry you're trying to get into, but to sort of say, look, this is the type of thing, here's a sample of my work. Whatever you can, just to sort of say, this is not an idle sort of thing. I just think it's nice to work in banking, but I don't know what that means. I just, think about wearing a suit every day and getting paid a lot. That sounds fun. No, show that, okay, this is what the job entails. I'm doing the training. I'm trying to stand out. I'm getting as prepared as I can, and I'm ready for this job. And if you give it to me, I'll do a great job.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's got to be the message. It's all about clarity. It's all about dedication and showing that, if they take a chance on you, you won't disappoint.
Yeah, because it's a big investment for a bank, because the salaries are very high. Bonus expectations are often a multiple of that on top. So if you're bringing in someone who has got no experience or little experience and you're paying them a large wage, what you're really demanding from them is their labour and their commitment. If they don't show that, why would you hire them? And I think perhaps listeners need to really appreciate, or hopefully they do, is that what you're offering these banks is your time and your energy. You can't possibly be offering your expertise, with the greatest of respect, at 21, 22, if they have a school leaver program, which I think some banks are starting to do now, but it's mainly once you're a graduate, it's that early 20s period. You've got nothing to your name. I mean, very few people have. So sitting there and giving your time and that effort is how you're going to stand out from the rest, and how you're going to deliver that. And so you've got to show the commitment throughout. So I think being able to prove that on an application and demonstrate that obviously in the interview is what I'm hearing, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
And let's fast forward a little bit. So listeners have done the application, they've nailed it, they've got the job. They're now an analyst at boutique bank M King & Co. perhaps.
Fantastic. Welcome.
Working with one of the best in bankers in the world. What would you say, just peeling it back more generally, would be the general sort of day in the life of an analyst at maybe a bulge bracket, because I know you have a lot of contacts there, and potentially at a boutique? Are they massively different? Could you elaborate on either one, I guess?
They're probably not all that different at the most junior level. While you absolutely do contribute to sort of live deals as an analyst, it tends to be sort of supervised through several layers of more senior personnel before sort of there's any actual client output. So, while you'll be doing a lot of analysis, hence the name, I suppose, but, lots of spreadsheets, lots of research, lots of sort of preparation of materials, lots of pitch work. So when they're going out trying to win new business, you'll be doing a lot of the preparation for those marketing materials, and then the analysis that underpins those marketing materials. So there's going to be a lot of time sort of working to sort of enable the rest of the business to run. You may not necessarily be speaking with clients or even joining sort of a lot of calls with the client, even just to listen, but what you will likely be doing is valuation work, looking at comparables or precedent transactions in the space of similar companies to try and estimate the valuation. You could be looking into supporting on the due diligence front if you're sort of going through a process on sort of a buy side or a sell side. The different advisors will be asking questions, trying to understand the condition of the company and its prospects, and all the legal risks and the accounting classifications, etc. And so there's a lot of Q&A exchange back and forth that needs to be sort of coordinated and managed. So you'll be doing a lot of that type of work.
Yeah.
And so basically there's a lot of background stuff where you're getting exposure and sort of doing a lot of the work, but it's then being supervised and checked and then ultimately coordinated by more senior people. But I would generally characterize it almost as like a boot camp.
Yeah.
You go in and you're relatively well paid from a national average perspective, and you're very fortunate to have made it in the door, and you certainly go in feeling very excited. But then you very quickly realize that, although you're now part of, a pretty competitive and sort of elite group, you're very much the small fish in the big pond. And so, for me, it's a learning experience, and yeah, a lot of the work, to be honest, is slightly repetitive and not terribly interesting. But the real challenge that I would like to take away, a lot of people, particularly if you have a finance background in your academic career before starting work, if not, that's something you also have to learn on the job. But, what you really need to learn most of all is sort of reliability, attention to detail, these types of things. Because again, when it's such a competitive field, they're not just even paying for your time. They're not just paying for your dedication. What they ultimately want is someone that if I asked you to do something, you will do it quickly, perfectly, reliably, every time. And if I ask you to change something, you understand what and why pretty quickly,
Yeah.
and you can do that quite quickly. And and once that's the case, then you can sort of step up a rung and someone comes in behind you and you start training them in turn. And it's
Yeah.
sort of, that's the model. And so I really treat the analyst stage as quite a grueling stage, absolutely. But it's all about education. It's all about learning. It's all about adapting to meeting the expectations of the firm. And yeah, most of them, at the end of the day, those organizations charge a huge amount of money for the services they provide. And ultimately what they're selling is expert advice, expert analysis, sort of around the clock type of coverage. And so it is demanding. It does require a really high standard of performance that, certainly going from my academic career when I was a high performing, student, but arriving to it was a different just order of what was expected. And,
Yeah.
it takes time to learn that.
And did you get a lot of please fixes from your seniors? It's a classic sort of ring on a on a slide of a presentation and they say please fix, but no one knows what it is. I mean, there's that. I'm sure it's real because enough people have said it, and I'm sure it's a rite of passage. I think for a lot of analysts to get, but I really liked how you articulated that point because I think is a really clear picture for people going into the analyst program what they're actually being paid for, and I think to those that perhaps don't have an understanding of the industry, why someone is being paid such a large amount of money for all these things. Well, it's because, as you say, they're working 80, 90, 100-hour weeks. It's just expected. They're having to do things that are relatively mundane but repetitive and needs to be efficient and quick. Formatting, is real. It needs to be mastered as an art. Um, Give us a flavour of the kind of hours you used to do. I mean, do you look back and go, I did 80-hour weeks for several years and, what the hell was I doing? Could you have cut that by 20 hours and actually done some more sightseeing of London and explore other aspects?
I mean, certainly the early years were more busy. And even then, to be honest, there was quite a bit of, variety between different firms. I worked in a number of firms and, some were sort of, you'd still be working, 60 to 70 hours a week probably, which is certainly more than a normal job, but actually for investment banking is pretty good. Normally, your weekends were quite predictably free. And so, you might stay late a couple of times during the week to sort of finish off some things, but, that they had a culture really of, unless it was a client deadline, if there was a big pitch or there was sort of an offer coming up, then we'd have to work. But, the idea of just, staying late to do some research or to sort of come up with some targets or something, that wasn't really part of the culture. And, it was a relatively successful firm, not the most successful that I'd ever worked in, but, that was probably a pretty good mix of sort of culture and success. And then others, they lean more towards, getting their pound of flesh. They pay you well and they just expect you to perform. So I would say most of my early career was spent probably more of that 80 to 100-hour a week range. Yeah.
It's intense. I mean, there's only, 148 hours in a week?
24/7, yeah.
Yeah, so if you're talking about
160.
100 hours, or 100, so 160, if you're talking about 100 hours, you're talking about, a distinct lack of sleep. You're talking about, even when we're talking about hours worked, so the other bits around traveling to and from the office, even if you live close, time for yourself, dinners, meeting your family, spending time with friends, dating. I mean, all of that can kind of been pushed out the window, and your dedication is solely on this job. I mean, for a minimum of 2 years in an analyst program, let alone the several years you did. Is that a sacrifice that's worth it?
I think everyone has asked themselves that question. You know, I don't regret making the choice. I mean, certainly when I came here to London, I didn't really have any friends and family living here anyway, and so it was simply a matter of, you know, the distraction wasn't there. But you know, you go in, and I mean that was your life, and you do bond a lot, I have to say, with your co-workers. I mean, again, I think the boot camp comparison is a good one. You're sort of all there.
Trauma
you know,
bonding.
yeah, exactly. It's sort of, you know, 1 o'clock in the morning, and you're all there, and then sort of, what are you working on? You know, pitch tomorrow. What are you working on? Comps. Okay. You know, and you know, every now and then you'd just be waiting. You know, sometimes we'd just be waiting for comments back, and we'd, you know, just be standing throwing a tennis ball back and forth across the office, just waiting. You know, a big part of an analyst's job sometimes is just waiting, because you are relying on feedback from sort of more senior personnel, and so until you've gotten that feedback, there's not really much you can do. And also, if the deadline is tomorrow, you can't really leave until it's done. So you're then sort of in this annoying position where it can be, you know, 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and you're just waiting. And so, you know, that's a big part of why the job is so intense. You know, quite often a very familiar pattern of work is usually the analyst will sort of arrive at 9, maybe 10 if last night was a real shocker, and you know, just be working on some various things, but it's not really that busy because everyone else has also gotten into the office at 9. And so they then start looking at what you sent them last night, and then maybe they sort of got some meetings to deal with, you know, clients and whatever. And it's probably only after lunch that they then really start thinking about what, you know, you should be doing next. And so actually you get into the office, you probably don't have that much to do before lunch. You're just sort of there hoping maybe to go to a meeting or in case they need you in an emergency. But again, it's not particularly busy. And then quite often over the course of the afternoon, that's when people sort of actually start delegating new tasks to you. So then you quite often find yourself at around 4 p.m. or 5 or 6 p.m. reaching the sort of peak. And that's why the evenings are sort of a write-off, because you've actually just received the work later in the day. So I don't know, there's probably some clever way to fix that, and hopefully someone someday comes up with it. Maybe it should just be a nocturnal sort of night job rather than, you know, more of a round the clock thing. But you know, it can be quite a demanding task.
Yeah, and when you're sort of standing there throwing a ball to your fellow analyst at 2 a.m. in the morning, do you ever ask yourself, why am I here? What am I doing this for? What's my motivation? Or is that just something that you accepted as part of being in that role and you just get on with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's probably just certainly part of my character in general. You know, once I've decided that this is what I was doing, then the only problem then was just doing it. I don't think I ever really spent much time thinking about whether or not I should change my mind or anything. And it was just something to sort of push through. And, you know, because you can always see, you know, the more senior people in the firm, I mean, it's a temporary phase to push through. And so if it's something that you really want to do, then, you know, you sort of, you see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and you just need to sort of hunker down and get through it. Or if you don't want to do it and it's really not for you, my advice would be sort of as quickly as possible, once you get in there and see that, pull the ripcord. But once you've sort of gotten in there and you've been there for a year, the idea of leaving sort of halfway through so that, you know, people think, oh, well, he couldn't really hack it. But you've also wasted a year of your life working, you know, living at your desk. That's probably the worst of all worlds. So for me, once I was in, I said, yeah, this is pretty intense, but let's just punch through this and get it done.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Like, motivation is really, really interesting, because when I think I might have been 11, my old maths teacher used to tell me, you know, if I have to give you motivation, then you've already failed. Like, there's no point of you even going further. And I was 11 years old, for God's sake, but he was a very good maths teacher, I should say. But he used to say, go home, go to the end of your garden and dig up your motivation, because I can't give it for you. And this is a very dramatic response to not doing maths homework. But what I learned from that, or I think I learned from that, was that motivation comes from within. Like, no one can give it to you. So fair share of all-nighters. I'm sure you've done. Unfortunately, I've done as well, which I'm not proud to say, but it's part and parcel of working in the financial industry. Is that when you're there and you're sitting at 2 a.m. and you're waiting for comments, or you're doing a model, financial model, or you're writing an investment committee paper, or you're looking at comps, you have to really understand why you're doing why you're sitting there, and what you're doing, because what's the point of it all? What are you building? What are you heading towards? And I think a huge part of what we're trying to do here on RTA is to help people engage with the process. Why are they doing it? Are they just doing it because there's money and it sounds cool and people will respect you? If those are your points, fair enough. I have no qualms with that, but acknowledge that, double down into it, and achieve that. Don't hide behind it. So I think I always like talking to people about their motivations, because people have different why they're there, and some people are really frank. When I'm talking to clients, they're really frank. I just want to make loads of money. Okay, well, let's manufacture your circumstances to focus in on maximizing profitability, driving revenue, getting cash in your bank, and that'll help you achieve that financial objective. Others, most, tend to have broader objectives, in contributing to their wider community and wider society, and beyond. So it's really interesting to hear your motivations. One thing we haven't touched on are the kind of deals you've done. We flirted with some numbers, but to the extent you can talk about, of course, because I know you might have NDAs and a few other confidential bits, but can you give us a flavour of some of the deals you worked on at your boutique investment bank?
Yeah, I mean, it's been I guess, quite a few over the years. But, for me, the most interesting things, again, going back to this idea of, being able to give quality advice where you actually sort of understand the dynamics of the industry, the business, and offer sort of meaningful insights to clients. For me, the most interesting work was generally with sort of repeat clients, where because you work in an industry or with the same client, multiple times, you start to understand the personalities, you understand them and the competitors, how they interact, not just, at a sort of newspaper article level, but really sort of at a much more granular level, how the different divisions or different products that they offer sort of interact, and sort of how the market perceives them. And so, for me, I think some of the work that I did with the Daily Mail Group, which, I helped on 3 or 4 separate transactions. Similarly, there's Zoopla, the sort of property portal, and owner of Uswitch, and now sort of some other price comparison platforms as well. I did a lot of work with what used to be called Global Radio, now Global Media.
Okay.
We sort of helped with some strategic disposals, as well as some work on acquiring the out-of-home advertising assets. Used to be Experian, so all the advertising in the tube stations around London, etc., as well as Prime Site. So, where we work with clients 3 or 4 times, it tells you you're clearly doing a good job if they hire you again. So that's sort of a nice tick. But also, once you've been in there and you start to know the person, like once you know the basics, that's when you can really start adding more nuanced value. And I think that's where, again, in a competitive industry where, people are trying to stand out all the time, being able to have that more intimate knowledge of how an industry works really helps you stand out, really helps you sort of add that extra layer of value that maybe, one of your competitors can't.
Yeah. Because that's phenomenal. I mean, a lot of the boutique banks will rely on the quality of their deals to then obviously grow and build their name off the back of it, but also attract the right people. Did you know before you applied for that boutique bank, got into that bank, that these are the kind of deals that they did and that was something you were interested in? Or was it just, this is what they did and let's just jump in and have some fun?
No, absolutely. Part of my preparation for the application and then later the interview processes was to know everyone on the team, sort of where they'd studied, what sort of disclosed information there was around the deals that they'd worked on, where they'd worked before they worked at the current firm. I read all the press I could find about the deals that firm had worked on. And then, so even as part of my interview process and application process to the firm, I had sort of researched what they did, the type of companies they worked for, I'd already sort of reflected on that and decided why I thought that was really interesting. And ultimately, I've always found technology really interesting, and effectively technology and media, which is generally now consumed sort of digitally, is one of the most impacted sectors in terms of that. And so for me, it was always a really interesting sector, and that was one of the reasons I was so interested in going there in the first place, and sort of part of the draw, as it were.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, because one really interesting element I've always found about our work together, because for listeners that don't know and can't be bothered to look us up on LinkedIn, you and I did work together briefly, which was a lot of fun. Slightly different teams, but there were some interesting crossovers in the prop tech world.
That's right.
Which is phenomenal. But one thing I found out whilst we were working together was that you were on a work visa.
Yes.
And I don't know why it took me a while. I mean, I know why, because I'm quite thick-skulled, but clearly it took me a while to understand that you were a Canadian national, of course, Newfoundland, proudly so. And you're a Newfoundler. Is that from Newfoundland? What do you call yourself when you're from Newfoundland?
A Newfoundlander.
Newfoundlander.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, that's a mouthful.
I know. Occasionally people back home can refer to themselves as Newfies, but it's sort of a quasi-pejorative, so I offer it up, hesitantly. I've got no problem with it, but sometimes if you ever visit there and start referring to all the locals as Newfies, you will probably get a few sort of side eyes. So, but Newfoundlander is quite a lengthy one. So, yeah,
I'll stick to that if I don't get the side eye. But working on a work visa, I think it's 5 years before you can apply for some kind of permanent residency under the current law in the
That's
UK.
Right.
What was that like?
Well, at times, almost irrelevant in the day to day. I think always sort of relevant in terms of overall career trajectory, and then at times incredibly stressful. When I first came to the UK, there's actually a migration scheme between the UK and some of the other sort of Commonwealth countries where you can get, I think it's called the Youth Mobility Scheme. So young people, I think under 30, I think now it's under 35, but you can basically come for 2 years and work, and you don't need to be sponsored, so you can come and do whatever you like, and being Commonwealth, you can even vote in the elections. You can really sort of settle in and feel quite comfortable. At the end of the 2 years, then I needed to get my first work visa, and fortunately my current employer at the time was quite happy with the work that I'd been doing, and so they were then willing to sponsor me. And that sort of had changed, because in the 2 years I was here on the youth mobility scheme, I didn't require sponsorship. I'd actually changed jobs within a single year. And as part of that move, I was able to find a team that really needed someone. I got in there. I was able to get sort of an increase in my salary and sort of go in at a slightly more sort of senior perceived level. And so that was all very positive. Once you have the work visa, it actually becomes so much more difficult to change employers. And so, I think, again, investment banking, it's an industry that has a lot of, variable compensation bonuses in terms of your total pay. And also there's always a bit of flexibility in terms of how quickly you progress up the ranks and things like that. And so the idea being, normally, people who are your top performers, you don't want them to leave. So you pay them very well so they don't leave and they don't go to a competitor, and your competitors likewise be very happy to steal your best performers. And so not that I have any outrageous examples. I would say that I probably, some of my peers who started at very similar times, and I think we had always delivered, quite similar, financial results for the firm. I think the locals probably did progress a little bit faster. But at the same time, there are always lots of other factors around culture and performance and things like that. But certainly the fact that, if you don't have the compensation that you think you deserve at least, or if the culture is not a great fit for you, or the type of client that you're working with is not the right fit for you, it is difficult to make a change. And particularly once you've gotten enough experience, I think one of the best things that you can do is just put yourself in the right place. I mean, once you know yourself and the value that you bring, you know, put yourself in a place where that's sort of recognized and valued.
Yeah.
You know, I think in the investment banking world, very broadly, you sort of have, you know, the two extremes really for me are on the one end, the sort of the analysis that's required, you know, to sort of help guide the right decisions. And then on the other extreme, you probably have sort of charisma or negotiation, you know, the ability to make people think that what you're saying is a good idea.
Yeah.
And ideally, I guess the perfect firm has got, you know, someone, maybe even the same person, sort of providing all of the analysis and the insights to make sure that they understand what the right decision should be, and then someone else with the sort of charisma to sell in that opinion and, you know, carry the day, so that that's done. But generally, particularly in smaller firms, I guess, where, you know, the founder sort of has a, you know, just an individual personality, you know, quite often some of these firms will sway, you know, more to one side than the other.
Yeah.
And so if you find yourself maybe not in a complete fit for the culture, you know, either you've got to try and adapt yourself, which, you know, takes time and takes effort, or you can sort of put yourself in a different position. And, you know, certainly a local has more flexibility when it comes to that than someone on a work visa, because you quite simply can't. Someone would have to sort of advertise the job for 30 days. They would need to demonstrate to the immigration authorities that no local applicants were able to sort of do the job well enough. You then need to sort of go through a sponsorship exercise, which is time consuming, it's expensive, etc. And so, you know, again, in a competitive industry, just the fact that it's, you know, hire me, I could do the job. By the way, it's going to cost you an extra 20,000 in 3 months compared to hiring someone else. I mean, you've got to really be above and beyond for you still to sort of close the deal with that as your pitch.
And did you ever find that when you were going into salary negotiations, promotion negotiations, that spectre of the visa before you got permanent residency was hanging over you? I mean, did you ever feel that you were in a weaker position because you had that there, or did you not care?
I mean, I wouldn't say that I cared when I would go into the negotiations. I mean, I had always been, I think, a good performer. And so I was never really concerned for my job. But I mean, when it comes to sort of getting the most out of your negotiations, you know, the biggest implied, you know, threat is the risk that you'll walk. And the fact that it's quite difficult for you to get a job somewhere else, you know, does slightly undercut that risk and that sort of inherent threat from your side. So there's no doubt that it sort of reduces your bargaining power. But, you know, I've never, you know, no one ever sort of said to me, look, you can't go anywhere, you've got no option. So, you know, nothing that obvious or crass ever happened. And so, you know, any impact between that or, you know, personal issues or whatever the case may be, it's hard to tease out. But, you know, it's definitely something to be cognizant of, and actually, you know, much like, you know, an analyst being a boot camp type of thing, I slightly look at coming here and being on the work visa as a similar thing. It's something that, you know, the employer has sort of a competitive advantage over you in a way that it's difficult for you to change jobs, but similarly they're providing you, you know, the countdown to the 5 years that you need to then no longer need sponsorship. And so for me, it was sort of a trade. And you know, I don't regret spending the time, otherwise I wouldn't be here today. And so, you know, whatever the impact may have been or the cost might have been, it's sort of, you know, worth it at the end of the day. And again, all the things that you're learning, even if you're not getting paid maybe as much as you might have if you didn't have a work visa, you know, at the end of the day, all that education, the networking, etc., you know, it's still something that you're banking for the future.
Because I think it's a really interesting mindset, because I would love some comments on this, but for people that I've worked with that have been on the work visa, well, you're a great example of that. We're very fortunate at one of our firms that we sponsor a few people as well. And I mean, just speaking as an employer, it's very easy to take advantage of employees that are on that work visa because, as you say, the cost is a huge element and barrier for others, so that when you are in that negotiation, I know I'm sitting alongside one of my team members and they're trying to negotiate the salary. In the back of my mind, you're always thinking, well, they're on a work visa, can they actually go anywhere?
Yeah.
But you push that thought and admit it's a fleeting thought aside, because because that's irrelevant. You want to do right by that person. But I'd imagine there are very nefarious employers, and I know there are, that take advantage of that, and they say, well, I'm giving you a job and a chance for a better life in a country that perhaps you wouldn't have had access to if it wasn't for almighty me. But at the same time, as you say, it's sort of a quid pro quo. But as colleagues, which of course we were, is there anything that colleagues can do to support you in that sort of journey? Is it something um, that they could be conscious of, and as you say, cognizant of, that they don't want to make you feel like there's that spectre behind you, because you need to be able to play that card to leave so that you can negotiate appropriately?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in a way it's slightly difficult, because so much of it is, really when it comes to these negotiation dynamics, as you said, it's, a fleeting thought in the back of the mind. So it can be difficult to tease that out and address it in the open. But, there are some things I think practically that can be done, at least in cases where it's sort of egregious that, something is being done that's not quite right. And so whether that be looking at something like pay scales, where you can actually sort of define, certain capability, certain performance level equates to a certain pay level, and that then becomes a universal standard, so that it's no longer sort of just an ad hoc discussion where someone has got an obvious handicap, but it's sort of your performance was X, and hence your bonus is Y. Same with standardized bonus calculations or commission rates, etc. So some standardization I think can help level the playing field a little bit. And even when things are not maybe that consistent, maybe it's sort of for instance, investment banking, where it's more sort of down to managing clients. There's a lot of idiosyncratic differences between them. Even then, in my old firm, there'd be lots of sharing of notes.
Yeah.
In terms of what bonuses had been between us, what salaries were between us, etc. And then we could take a view, if someone was making more than you, maybe they had a better year than you. And if they didn't, something smelled a bit off. And so then you knew that you had some grounds. Again, you wouldn't sort of reveal all the information that you knew, but it certainly told you that there's obviously some grounds for you to try and go and get a little bit more, whatever the case may be. So, I think, at the end of the day, sharing information, is always sort of giving people the tools that they need to make the right decision for them.
Yeah. I mean, just thinking out loud is that because of that time requirement, which you would assume if you're the government, you want to have that in place, because if you want to give someone permanent residency, to all the points before we've said about committing to a firm, you want to commit to a country. So that sort of makes sense. You want to give an allotted amount of time before handing over permanent residency. So that requirement, I mean, of course, I haven't done the jurisdictional analysis across the world, but I'm sure most of the countries have that requirement in place. So because of that requirement, it's very difficult for that power dynamic between employees and employers to actually flip or change or even out, because that person has to be in the country for X number of years. And you as an employer know that it's difficult for other people to hire that person because of the points you've mentioned before. So what I'm really trying to understand is that it is different circumstances, different people that you work with in a team. And if you are lucky enough to work in a very large team with large people, to be conscious of the circumstances and how other people are feeling, so you can empathize with them. Maybe you can't do anything directly to support them, but as you say, indirectly, you can share a bit of information about how you're being compensated to ensure that they are getting the best deal for them, particularly if they're a high performer like yourself. Alternatively, when we're in positions of as an employer, as you and I are now running our own businesses, and we have the ability to apply for sponsorship and get the Home Office to sign off on us, that we empathize and appreciate that person is working on a work visa, they've got slightly weaker negotiation stance, but you never use that against them because that's nothing because of anything that's been earned or otherwise. It's just a circumstance because they're born in a different country and have come over here. It's not something they chose. So I think it's really interesting, the psychology of that, because I know for a fact that large professional services firms in the financial industry, in the legal industry, will have a list of people that they've given work visas to because they have the budget to do that. But the propensity for them to leave once they've got permanent residency is very high. So that time difference between when they join the firm and that permanent residency grant is a time period that that firm knows they've got, broadly speaking. And so once your HR team knows that, once your team knows that, there's a percentage chance of being taken advantage of. And do you think there's a way to sort of stop that? Or is it just part and parcel of the criteria and requirements that will always be there?
I mean, I think it would be a complicated issue to solve. I myself resigned 2 weeks after getting my own indefinite leave to remain in the country. Not that I had been, particularly badly treated necessarily, but, I think it certainly speaks to the idea that, there's a certain amount of freedom that comes with no longer needing the sponsorship. In terms of how you might be able to address it, I have seen, for instance, I think in Spain, they have a system where, you apply for immigration status. Once you have the visa, once you come into the country, I think you have, you don't have the right basically to not work. You don't have the right to sort of, draw down on public funds beyond benefits, whatever the case may be. But I don't think the companies themselves are responsible for sponsoring you.
Okay.
And so once you're in, it's like, okay, well, we think you'd be a good addition to the country. Welcome. And then after that, it's sort of up to you to optimize in the marketplace. So, which to me sort of slightly makes sense. If you have a job, if you're an accountant, for instance, and you want to be an accountant not here but somewhere else, doesn't seem, presumably, the firm that you left will now have to hire another accountant anyway. So, to me, that might be one of the easier ways to sort of remove this sort of lock-in effect, because obviously we'll have seen, in the recent general election here in the UK, migration once again sort of being a very hot topic. People are really looking at this, and the idea that a lot of employers maybe are using migrants simply as low-cost labor rather than as trying to get the very best people that they possibly can, particularly in sectors where there's shortages. To me, that's sort of a misuse of the system even. So I think it's in everyone's best interest, the employees, the sort of general population, etc., to sort of find a way that we really think about who is sort of needed, welcome, etc. into the UK. But once they arrive, then to sort of, I guess, maybe give them a little bit more latitude in terms of what they're able to do and to have a professional career more similar to sort of locals. Otherwise, in the end, you're sort of putting a downward pressure, I think, on what people are paid, which then ultimately affects all the employees.
Right. Yeah, which is a challenge, as you say. It's a complex issue, but it's I think it's important for listeners to recognise that if they're working with people that are on work visas, that perhaps it's important to empathise with their position. And for those that are on work visas, I think you've articulated really well the feeling that you get sometimes that there is a little bit over you, and when you get, I still remember actually quite clearly when you got permanent residency. I had no clue. I just assumed you didn't have a work visa. So I was surprised that you were even relieved at the chance of getting that residency. But I really remember that day because I know that you felt sort of a sense of relief, and I know you're very cool, calm, and collected most of the time. To have that relief off your, or that weight off your shoulders, and that sense of relief, it must have been a great day.
Well, absolutely. And in fact, I was here 10 years before I got my indefinite leave to remain. The first 2 years on this working holiday scheme, as I mentioned, as a young person. But I then worked for 3 years and had been working in a firm and wasn't doing particularly well. And, the firm was clearly going to be shut down. And so I then needed to find another job. And actually to find another job, when you have a work visa, requires a new sponsorship, and again, it's very onerous. And so actually the firm ended up shutting down before I could find another job. And in fact, I ended up going back to my previous employer. But by the time the job had been advertised for 30 days and we'd gone through the sponsorship process, we sort of passed over this 60-day reset period, so that my 5-year residency period started again all over 4 years into me living here.
Must have been really frustrating.
Well, it was a little frustrating, and at the time, actually, it was very sad because you couldn't extend your work visas in the UK beyond 6 years.
Oh.
And I said to my legal advisor at the time, well, I've already been here for 2 years. I said, that's right. And I said, but I've extended it. And they said, well, you can extend it for up to 4 more years. And I said, but you need to be here 5 years to get ILR. And they said, that's right. I said, but how do I do that? They said, you can't. After 4 years, you just have to leave. It's impossible to stay. And 2 years after that, they changed the legislation so that sort of cap was removed. But at the time, and this is all part of the uncertainty in things. If you're trying to build a life, someone's now telling you, well, after 4 years, you've just got to leave. So don't buy a home, don't settle down, no marriage, no children, because this is a 4-year temporary thing. And then the legislation changed, and thankfully I was then able to push through and get my ILR. But you're really sort of at the mercy of the system of rules and things. And this was back in the days of Theresa May with her sort of hostile immigration policy, the hostile environment, where they were basically just looking for reasons to say no to you because they were trying to get migration down. So everything they could do to sort of you forgot to sort of cross that T or dot that I, you didn't send this paper or something, we're going to reject the application or, the deportation. And so, it's a bit of a burden, so it was certainly something to be managed. It wasn't the sort of most fun experience. I'm very relieved now to be not just a permanent resident. I've now got the passport. When I first came here, I remember I was going to be very excited that I'll be able to travel all over Europe once I get my EU passport. Anyway, post 2016, that hasn't happened. But still, I've after putting 10 years into it, it's still quite a meaningful thing to get a British passport.
Oh yeah, proud British citizen, passed the various what is it, the Life in the UK test?
That's right.
Yeah. No, I remember helping my wife pass that test, and it was I couldn't even answer half the questions myself. I had to start questioning my own citizenship, even though I was born here. So
I have to say, a lot of the trivia hasn't really come up a lot since.
I would imagine. So thank you for sharing that, by the way, on your work visa, because I know it's a tough and very complex issue, but it's also tough to articulate psychologically, because at the end of the day, you just want to do your job. You just want to get in there. You've got a great job. You've got a chance to break into the industry that you've wanted to break into. I know people say it's just 4 or 5 years, but that's quite a long time to settle in. You've built a life, and even just renting a place and getting to know people and get to know your neighbours and get to know your peers and your bosses. You've really invested your time and energy into the country. So do appreciate you sharing that, because it's not an easy topic, and I really wanted listeners to really appreciate that it's not easy for everyone. That certainly for me as a British citizen, I'm born and bred here, West London, moved to Northwest London. Now I live in central Northwest London, so I've really been sort of hugging close here. So I've always taken, I think, for granted being able to just work and live here quite easily, and in quite an incredible city. And even when I went travelling, it's either visa on arrival or an e-visa. It's pretty simple. You fill in a form. You can even fill in the form like a few days before you travel, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
And so appreciating that sometimes you just want to go to another country, just work a little bit, build a life there. If you're lucky enough to stay there a bit longer, fine. Actually, it's a bit harder for some than others, and it'd be nice if all of us just empathise a little bit more. That making that journey all the way from Newfoundland, a village of 85 people, I can't even picture that, to be honest with you. I think my road had 85 people when I was born. So to be in a village of 85 people where everyone knew each other, and it was really sort of, I can picture sort of the Hollywood movies or this picturesque, beautiful, mountainous area. And then coming all the way here to the bright lights of London, just the stark contrast of that, with the spectre of the responsibilities of being a good employee and getting the work visa and ticking all those boxes off, and now you're the founder of the mighty M King Co, which we probably should talk about now. It makes absolute sense. I mean, just to remind everyone and the listeners, M King Co is a boutique consultancy practice where you're advising on a number of matters, but focusing primarily on, of course, financial matters, business plans, and general business strategy. So, actually, rather than say, why don't I ask you, why would a business come to you for your services?
That's a great question. It's probably the one I get asked the most when I'm meeting someone for the first time. So, my experience is quite often when you've got someone who's founded their business, they are really passionate about the product. Could be the service, whatever the case may be. If it's a business that is a travel business, the founder, he knows everything about travel. He knows the best places to go. He knows how people like to be treated. He knows all the secrets to, get a little bit of, special deals, some extra inventory from this place or that provider. If it's someone who's a technology business, they're obsessed with, how it actually is built, how it works, how they can integrate with their customers, with all the different suppliers, how they can improve, the list goes on. But quite often, those types of businesses then require capital investment to help them go to the next level. And what I often find is you've got a lot of business leaders who they've got great businesses and they love what they do and they know everything about what they do. And most capital providers speak a slightly different language.
Yeah.
And having spent 10 years working in the financial services industry, it's a language I understand. And in fact, for many years, working in that industry, you effectively work with companies to bring them to market, to then speak directly to those capital providers. And, the questions that they get asked are broadly predictable across industries, across everything. There's always some specific elements, but, 80-90% of it is pretty standard in terms of, what's the business plan? What are the KPIs? What do you think the business is going to do over the next 5 years? What sort of cash investment do you need to achieve that outcome? Those types of things. And so, what I basically tell people is, you've got a great business and actually generally they've got a great plan. What they don't necessarily do is, sort of articulate it in a way that capital providers, investors, etc., will understand and appreciate. And similarly, there's, some what I'll call housekeeping things in terms of having good board packs, tracking the right KPIs internally. So you're actually creating then, all the materials that an investor would then want to see to understand how the business has been progressing. Again, lots of people, you create a business, and so why do you need a board? Just sort of seems like a waste of time to you. And you go, well, but having every month sort of a little report written telling about all the things you're working on, all the progress you've made, the challenges you're facing, the opportunities you see, people can go back then and read that and see how effective you are at dealing with issues and staying on track with your strategy, etc. So for me, it's really been a way to take the learnings of what people look at when they're considering buying or investing in a business and actually helping companies get ready long before they actually need to go to the market. Because the reason that people look at those things is because they are important, actually. And just because you're an expert in travel or an expert in technology or an expert in, events, whatever the case may be, doesn't mean you're an expert in KPI tracking or P&L forecasting, all these financial topics that are important, but they're not necessarily important to those operational leaders in their businesses.
And taking that jump, so you say you resign within 2 weeks of getting ILR. There's no correlation there, I'm sure. And then you set up M King Co. I mean, what was that process like? I mean, when you resigned from your job, did you know that was something you wanted to do? Were you looking for another job? Why did you take the leap to self-employment rather than continue your illustrious career?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, and actually just for the sake of absolute honesty on the record, I resigned 2 weeks after I got my permanent residency, but that was the end of February 2020. So about 10 days after I resigned, COVID broke out and the lockdowns were announced. And so, and again, I think it speaks to, going to this point around, are you disadvantaged with a work visa, etc. Having just resigned and basically having the majority of our projects put on hold because of COVID and no one knowing what was going on, I then sort of called up my effectively former employer saying, I've got a lot of projects that we're working on at the moment. I wouldn't really want to leave you in the lurch, actually, thinking about it. And, them understanding really that I sort of had put my foot in it, was sort of like, all right, we just keep rolling you month to month on the same salary and everything as before. And, obviously I worked very hard over those months and whatever. And so I actually carried on for about another year. But the timing of my resignation was slightly suboptimal. And so I then carried on working for, I don't know, another 10 months, I guess, until the end of 2020, really. And then after that, I said, they sort of said after a year, then, okay, either come back or,
move on. Probably.
Exactly. And I said, that's completely fair enough. And, although I didn't want to go off and do my own thing in the middle of COVID because I wouldn't have been allowed to actually go anywhere anyway, it was still my ambition to go. And so, I said, completely fair. And thank you for keeping me around for that extra time. Really sort of kept me busy over the sort of lockdown period, which is great. And then the beginning of 21, I sort of said no. And really it was purely just down to motivation. I didn't have a plan on what I wanted to do next. I had no interest in taking a similar job. I called my parents and told them, they were quite pleased. At first they thought I was, leaving home to go and do something bizarre over in London. They're like, what is that? And then I told them, it's going really well. And they got a bit happy. And then I called them and said, I've just resigned. And they said, oh, do you have another job? No. Oh, so what's the plan? There is no plan. Okay. And I said, I told them, it's like, I need to find something. I'm at the moment, I've been very blessed, of course. It was a lucrative industry and you were very well paid. I had a lot of savings. And so that was all, not something you can take for granted, but I was in a very fortunate position. And so, I told them, I would rather, I would rather fail to trying to do something I actually want to do than sort of continue doing something that doesn't really interest me, for any amount of money. It doesn't, I don't need anything. I'm not trying to buy anything that I can't buy. I don't need to keep doing this. And actually I took about a year, just what I thought was sort of market research, what I thought was sort of business development. Looking back, I was, over analyzing everything. And I think that's one of the big learnings I think that people have to take away, the difference between being an employee and being an entrepreneur. Especially in a bank, people are not going to pay you what they pay an investment bank for you to sort of give it a go.
Yeah.
You need to know exactly what you're doing and you need to do it perfectly and quickly and every time. Whereas as an entrepreneur, people sort of say, oh, do you do that? Yeah. I mean, I haven't, but I could probably. But you need to just, yeah, exactly. You will figure it out. And in the end, that sort of transition, because I spent a year basically trying to figure out how the whole business would work. And after a year, I just written a bunch of stuff, but I hadn't actually spoken to, I had like one or two clients, very small, that entire year. And so, there was no feedback. The paper didn't reflect reality. It was just a waste of time. And then in the end, a former colleague just called me and said, Matt, I met someone. I said, oh, it's great. I mean, it's pretty normal. And he sort of, he needs a financial model. Do you do that? I said, I could. And I don't really know what you charge, but I told him around this. Is that all right? Yeah, okay. And, that number was like 4 or 5 times more than I'd been asking people up until then. Wow. And I was like, so clearly the pricing is just completely wrong that I've been doing a year's research on. That's just complete nonsense. And actually, I've been trying to sell people like research reports. Yeah. But people don't need research reports. Like, people don't really want, and this is my new mantra, is, it's better to be quick than perfect. Just do something And then because you'll learn why it's wrong, and it will always be wrong. But the only way you learn what's wrong is you actually need to show it to someone else, and then they'll sort of give you feedback. And it's the feedback that allows you to then make it better.
Yeah.
So it really sort of took me 2 years to from sort of resignation to sort of properly launching and incorporating in January of 22. But given that I was still working basically for a year, there was sort of a year of soul searching. And then, thank goodness, a former colleague basically just put a completely different type of work in my lap and just gave me sort of a wake-up call that all this research and trying to create the perfect business model was just a waste of time. You actually just need to get out there, find clients, offer them things that they want. So go and talk to them. Find people that you think you want to work with, that you'd like. Ask them, what they need help with, what they struggle with. Then start tinkering. Try different things, pitch them on something. If they're not interested, pitch them on something else. And, that was a real change in mindset for me. And that really was when I decided, okay, I need to incorporate a business now. It's not just an idea. This is clients. People are actually really interested in this because you're helping people at the end of the day. That most of my clients have already taken investment.
Yeah.
So they've got, whatever, depends the size on the company, but sort of generally 5 million plus in funding already from an institutional investor.
Yeah.
And so lots of them are going to board meetings and the investors are asking them questions that they can't answer. There's a lot of frustration, there's anxiety, people don't understand the plan. And just when you come in and make that, improve that relationship by just improving the information flow, it's just such a load off the founder's mind so that he can get back to growing the business. And, it's for me been a real sort of change of focus from trying to sort of worry about giving someone the perfect solution to actually just making something better. That's generally what it is. You're never finished. Everything is always a work in progress.
I think there's some really interesting elements to your answer. I want to peel it all the way back a little bit because there's the mindset behind shifting from employment to self-employment, which you've articulated. But there's also a practical element, which is that, you have bills to pay, you had some savings. Now, generally, I recommend, from a professional standpoint, if I'm allowed to say that as an accountant, I should be able to. But from a professional standpoint, I always say have 2 years worth of expenses saved up so that come what may, you've got that nice runway. You can put that aside and your rent mortgage is paid for, your whatever expenses you have, they're sorted. Inevitably, you'd have to compromise, but it's sorted. I'm not going to ask how much you had saved up. That's a bit rude of me. But did you ever think, okay, I've done well, I've got money in the bank, that gives me runway. So from a practical perspective, those savings really helped you to say, right, I can make that trip now, I can make that journey, I can explore a little bit, I can do some analysis for a year before I'm even making money, because I know I've got a pot of money sitting there. How important was that, do you think, to you being able to just spend time on you and your business?
Yeah, I think the resources were absolutely... I mean, I guess there's probably two ways to look at it. One is I probably needed, if not a year, then a pretty big chunk of time, because, I was relatively burned out at that time because it's such an intense industry. And so the time to recuperate and sort of rest up a little bit, reflect, reassess and reorient yourself was probably partly necessary because of the work that I'd been doing. But similarly, the ability to sort of ride out that storm was possible because of the industry. But, in general, and I see this a lot with, when I'm speaking with friends and everything, especially now in the line of work that I have, people have an idea.
Yeah.
They're like, I got this great idea. I just love to work on this. What do you think? It's a great idea. What are you doing about it? And they don't really know how to do the whole thing. And this is, I think, the one thing I learned in the 1 year. I mean, most people say, well, I don't have enough time to sort of make the full business plan, so I can't do it.
Yeah.
And I said, I had the time. I had a year. And actually, let me just tell you, making the plan for the entire business, there's no value in that. If you have an idea, if you think it's a good idea, there's probably something you can do right now. And if you just do that one thing, you'll be one thing further along. And then the next and you just keep going. And maybe if you're busy and you already have a job, you can only do one thing a week. Maybe your Saturday afternoon for a couple of hours, you can do one thing. And in a year, you'd be amazed at how far you can get doing that. And that's, you know, I think that's the secret. You know, if you have something that you want to do, you're not going to find generally, unless you do something very extreme, as in my case, you're not going to get an entire year to puzzle it out perfectly. And even if you do, that's not what you need. What you really need is to get started. So take a step, take another step, take another step, and actually then you start to get the ball rolling, and you'd be so surprised at where that journey can take you.
Yeah, because what I'm hoping to give the audience is a few functional tips around actually making that transitional journey. And we've got loads of clients at Apex and Business Plan where people want to make that step, but the practical element stops them. And you then go down the journey of the practical side, not having savings, quitting your job, and spending the time on your business plan, prevents you from doing all of that. Well, actually, no, it doesn't. That's just you actually kind of finding a cop-out. And that's the brutal message you have to, well, I try to deliver in obviously a nice, polite way, but sometimes I can't be so nice and polite, unfortunately. But with certain clients, you need to punch through that and say, look, you're wasting time. You're messing around. You just do something. Try it. And if it doesn't work, try something else. And if that doesn't work, try something. I mean, there's plenty of iteratives that you can go through to achieve what you want to achieve. And ultimately, what you thought at the start is definitely going to be different from what you thought 5 steps in and 10 steps in, I'm sure. But as you said already, MKIN kind of started out as an entity providing research reports, and now it's, you know, completely different to that. I'd love to know how many research reports you've written in the last 6 months. I mean, I doubt you've written
0.
one. Correct.
Yeah.
So business plans evolve because you did something about it. So I guess the key message here is you probably do have an element of time. Don't worry about the practical element, but what you should do is find a pocket of space in a week, in a day, to do something that tangibly gets you a bit closer to starting that business, developing out the business plan. To those that still find excuses behind that, what would you say to them?
I mean, I guess there's 2 things that I would say. I mean, the first, you know, in the things that you're doing, and I think sometimes, and I was guilty of this when I started, you're afraid of doing the wrong thing. And first of all, I would say don't be afraid of doing the wrong thing, because the wrong thing is actually, that's the learning curve. You'll never get, you know, you don't have all the answers today, and you'll never have all the answers until you start doing the wrong thing to then learn, okay, well, if that's not correct, then maybe this is correct. And so you've got to allow yourself to be willing to fail. And so if that's the excuse, I would let go of that. And I would just open myself up to doing small things. Like, don't take your life savings and just make some massive punt before you have any idea what's going on. Do small incremental steps, but be not just willing, but embrace being wrong. Just take a position just to learn what's going to happen. And then I think the other thing is, you know, different people have different circumstances and things in life, different responsibilities, different circumstances. And at the end of the day, if you think you have a good idea, but you have a family, you've got, you know, parents to care for, or you've got big student loans or a big mortgage or whatever the case may be, and you just cannot take that risk, I think that, you know, you could look at doing some sort of a partnership deal with someone or whatever to like bring in the help that you need to bring that idea to life. Or I think you just need to, you know, accept that if it's not something that you can do yourself, it's not something that you can find a way for someone else to help you with, then it might just be something that you sort of, you know, put aside for now. Maybe your circumstances change. Maybe if you meet the right person, you know, something you can always monitor. But at the end of the day, I don't think there's any way to sort of do something without taking a risk. And so if you've got an idea, if you're not able to do it full time, there are lots of examples of where people sort of meet technical founders. So they've got an idea, but they don't do coding, for instance, for a tech business. So you meet a technical founder. Or there's lots of examples where, people go in and get these early sort of angel investors to help fund something. So maybe they can get enough of a salary paid via these angels to sort of help them get started without taking more of a risk than they can tolerate. There's lots of alternatives.
Yeah.
And you don't need to just start everything in your garage like Steve Jobs. You can look at, different examples and getting the help you need. But if at the end of the day there's nothing you can find that really works, even then, I think having done the work and tested all the alternatives, you can at least then say to yourself, it doesn't work. I haven't just said, oh, I want to do it, and then I don't have any ideas about how. You can actually say, well, I've tried 10 different ways, and I just don't see a way that it works. If an 11th way occurs to me, I'll check it out. But otherwise, at least I can go to sleep tonight knowing that I've done everything that I can think of to do. And I'm still thinking, but until then, I can just sort of rest easy and stay in my lane until the right sort of moment comes.
Yeah, and there's that element of closure around exploring something, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
And I find a lot of times when, certainly I'm speaking to people, might be different to yourself, but there's a battle between the practicals and the dreams. And people fall into the so-called rat race where they're a little bit older, maybe they've got a couple of kids, as you say, mortgage, looking after parents, serious responsibilities that not one of them can lapse. These looking after your parents, people that have literally created you and looked after you, through to your own kids. Talking about circle of life, for God's sake. That's you want to do right by them, and then of course you have to provide for your family and provide for your partner if you've got one. And as you say, mortgage and really serious matters that you have to hit. Those will all be a priority of your dreams, and most people will take the practical side because they just got to do what they got to do. And the biggest challenge that I would put in front of those people is, how badly do you want it? And going back to my maths teacher, who I do remember the name of, but I'm not going to say, where you've got the motivation to do and execute on the dream that you've got and actually explore that. And even if it's for half an hour on a Sunday morning, when you have to get up a bit earlier just to try and explore it, if you really feel passionate about it and you're motivated, you will do it. Because the first thing that I ask a lot of clients around when they say they don't have any clue as to what they want to do, but they know they've got an itch they need to scratch to set up a business, I just ask them, well, when you've got spare time, because everyone does. It's nonsense if you're telling me that you don't have spare time. Everyone has at least 5 minutes, and everyone needs to Google something, savoury or unsavoury, but someone Google something, and I ask them, well, what do you Google? What are you interested? Is it sports? Fine. Is it my wife would definitely say Korean dramas. Why not? K-pop. I'm starting to learn a lot more about. And realise that I'm a terrible dancer compared to some of these amazing Korean pop groups. They're phenomenal. Through to anything else that's random. What genuinely interests you that you veer towards. If it's not Googling, then look at your social media algorithm. What do you actually start? What you're looking at. What is something that piques your interest? The algorithm will tell you, actually, annoyingly, what you probably do spend a lot of time on, what you're curious about. And then that's something to explore, even as an initial idea, if you have no clue as to what you really want to look at.
Yeah.
So there are genuine ways. But cutting through that, because I think a lot of those points are sort of logical points, and both you and I are advisors, slightly different angles, but we are advisors to clients. So we'll always, to a large extent, cut to the logical element. And I know you, like myself, will always touch on the emotional side, because that's what people really buy into. And I really want to explore, why do people not actually do that? Because it's obvious, right? There's always, as you said before, and throughout this this conversation, there's different ways, there's different things that people are looking at that they can explore, and there's an itch, and they'll go after it, and they'll try 10 ways and didn't find the 11th, so they'll stop. But generally people just want to have I think, be an entrepreneur because they want to have a bit more control of their lifestyle. They want to have a bit more control over why they're doing what they're doing and control that motivation to something that they're willing to do day in, day out. But why do you think someone doesn't do that? If you say, you give them 5 tips, this is how you should explore a business idea. If someone doesn't do it, why do you think they don't do it?
I mean, for me, probably the most common thing that I see is people confusing what they would like with what they want.
Mm.
And in particular, I know there are a lot of people who, really when they think about what they like about the idea of entrepreneurship is that thank you, it gets them away from a lot of the problems of employment. Exogenous thing, because you don't control your destiny as an employee ultimately. Like maybe you think that your boss is unreasonable, or maybe that you think your clients are too demanding, or thank you, or your co-workers steal your sandwich out of the fridge, or whatever it is that bothers you, and you think, I just wish that I would be in charge because I would fix it. I would be the benevolent dictator of my own life and fix these problems. But actually, it's not really what you want. Like, you would never actually give up the safety of your salary. You would never actually really want to take on the responsibility for having to decide the strategy of the whole company and things like that. And so I think, an element of it is people just thinking, really, they're just thinking, if I was my boss, basically, I'd be so much better at this. So I sort of want to have my own business, but I don't actually take any real efforts towards doing it because it's sort of more just a daydream, that I wish I didn't have to do this because, honestly, being an entrepreneur, you get to have, all of my best professional days have happened whilst being an entrepreneur, but also probably most of the worst days, because
What does the best day look like?
I mean, the best day is, you sort of get introduced to someone, you pick up the phone, all of a sudden they, I just a couple of weeks ago, I had 2 clients on the same day. So going from, having a year where you've basically done one project for a year almost, or one client for a year, for a couple of research papers, to now sort of signing up 2 significant clients for, material monthly retainers on the same day. That's like, oh my gosh, things are really going in the right direction. Things are taking off here. I think I'd added a guy to the team just the day before. So, the timing, you really had a feeling of momentum on that day. And so, sort of on a cloud. But then likewise, I mean, and that's you don't get those experiences really as an employee. Your boss doesn't call you up and say, oh, by the way, Rohit, I'm just going to double your salary. You're welcome.
Well, speak for yourself. No, I've never had that.
You know what I mean? Just out of the blue, unexpectedly, just, good news drops on your lap. It rarely happens like that. But similarly, if a client calls you and he's furious and maybe doesn't want to pay a bill or wants to end the contract or whatever. And that's the thing, like, as an employee, you don't have those lows either, because if there's a real big problem, what do you get to do? You could escalate it up to your boss, because it's now like, oh gosh, this is getting pretty hairy. All right, there you go. And when you're self-employed, the wins are yours, but the losses are yours as well. And so when people just sort of are kind of more or less fantasizing about how to escape the annoying day-to-day of the job, I don't think that's enough of a motivation to sort of take on all the risk and all the sort of ups and downs that comes with the entrepreneurial journey, because it's a different beast.
Oh, completely. I think as an advisor to a lot of people that we have this discussion quite often, should I quit my high flying private equity job to run a business, or double down into one of my portfolio companies. I really like them, and the practical element often prevents them from doing it, as we kind of discussed. But then when you give them suggestions of what they can do to get around it, because it's just logic, it's just problem solving, right? Which we can do. The hesitancy comes from the emotional response, which is like, oh, can I actually take on this risk? Can I actually do this?
Yeah.
And there's a confidence element, which is why I often say, as an accountant, I feel like a therapist. Sometimes I don't actually feel like I'm delivering advice. The team does that. I'm just there trying to gee on my clients and get them going. But as we've done with some of our mutual clients, but the real message here, which I think is sometimes, and I mean, I'll say it for myself, and I don't know if you echo it, is that there's a difficult message, which is that being an entrepreneur is really fucking hard. It's really hard, and when you were talking about your highs and lows, I was reflecting naturally on mine. And the day I signed my largest client, I lost two clients that afternoon. Now I can sit here and say, oh, there were small ones, and actually they both. One of them, I lost one of them because they were moving to a different country. But still, like, it hurts your ego as an entrepreneur. Like, but I deliver a great service. How dare you? And it's just like, yeah, but I'm moving 4,000 miles away. I'm like, yeah, but still, how dare you not take my service?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's there, right? It hurts and it's annoying and it's frustrating, and you can't buy into your hype too much as a business owner entrepreneur, because it's something that comes around the corner, which keeps you stoic. It keeps you kind of in your place. It keeps you humbled, which I've heard are good things to be. But at the same time, there's a deep, deep frustration there. And you've got to be able to control your emotions. And when the things are going well and the momentum, you buy into sort of what you're doing, and you actually really think about your business plan. You go, oh, I really wish I wrote this down into a nice articulate business plan. And some days you really wish you hadn't, because you just crack on with it. And there are gut decisions that you make which come off, and some that don't. But I really strongly feel, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, that people don't want to do it because they love to fantasize about it. What's the term? Mental masturbation? They love to do that rather than actually sit there and, as you said before, take that first half, even if it's a half step, into doing something towards their financial objectives or business or whatever they're trying to achieve. And I think that's the fundamental difference between an entrepreneur, business owner versus an employed person or otherwise, is that the entrepreneur is just willing to take that step, and with that step carries risk, but also carries reward. And so when people talk about, do entrepreneurs deserve that reward, and that's probably another conversation for another day, but you can start to feel that out, right? They're taking on this huge risk of, well, if it all collapses, it's all on me. As you say, you can pass the buck up, but that buck is now you. It's now me.
Exactly.
So it's we have to deal with that, and something, it has to be dealt with. If you're a company providing a service, something's not going right. We, as the business owners, directors, main guys in the hot seat, we have to deliver on that.
Employees are not happy, your problem. Customers are not happy, your problem.
Yeah.
Some problem in getting deliveries, your problem. Tax problem, your problem. Everything is now on you.
Is now on you, and there are problems that you didn't know were problems that you have to deal with, and curveballs. But having good people around you always helps to solve those problems. But the responsibility is on you, and so I think to people that are really thinking about wanting to set up a business and transition from employed to self-employed, one of the big questions you have to ask yourself is, are you willing to A, take that first step, to do something about it, not just sit there and think about it, but do something, make that call, draft up that design for a product, whatever the hell it is, just do it.
Yeah.
Are you willing to take the emotional roller coaster? Because it really is up and down. Are you willing to put the work ethic in? Because if you think that 120 hours a week is hard work, be an entrepreneur. Because when people ask me what my hours are, it's eyes open, eyes closed. It's not 7 till whatever. It's just I'm up and I check my phone. There's clients we have overseas, so we have to deal with any emails or messages that come from that. Then, as you said before, you get into the office, it's 9 o'clock. Maybe there's an employee issue or there's a client issue, deal with that. And then you actually get to do some work for about 20 minutes, and then something else comes up, and then you've got to eat at some point, and you forget about eating. And then there's another issue, and then there's more and more things that you've got to keep doing. And at some point in there, you have to say to yourself, oh, I'm doing well, or I'm not doing well, or what's going right, or what's going wrong. And there are lots of people that make it look easy, but it's really not. It's really not. And to people that want to go onto that journey, It's a constant one. It's a difficult one. But if you're willing to do those things, then do it. Don't mess around. Just take that first step and do it.
Absolutely. No, I there was sort of this saying that I always thought was a little bit trite, that, I didn't give a lot of credence to it, sort of, the A students, sort of, doctors and lawyers, whatever, and, the B students sort of work for jobs, and then the C students, create the businesses, and the B students work for the C students, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that I've muddled the saying, but it doesn't matter.
They get what you mean.
They understand. It's a pretty common phrase, and I always thought, like, that's, it's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. But with experience now, I look at that, and there's a big truism to it. I mean, I think I was an academic performer in school. I think you also, but and so actually that made it more difficult to learn later. But actually, for me, the biggest predictor of whether you'll be a successful entrepreneur is, some people want to know, can we do it? Entrepreneurs just cannot be stopped. They're not interested in, they don't need a map. They don't need it. They're just gonna go. They just make things happen. And if you just continue making things happen, eventually, and it won't be what you planned, most likely, but something will start to work, and then it will start to go. And, my general sort of approach with people, and I had a conversation with someone just a couple of weeks ago on this, actually, but, I will, if someone comes to me with a problem and it's presented as a problem, I will offer them some potential solutions, and then we can try and brainstorm. And if people don't really engage with the solutions, I recognize the solution is, or the problem is, really an excuse. And if that's the case, you've got to go to your math teacher's garden and go and dig up that motivation. Because if really you just want to think that you are the type of person who could be an entrepreneur, but you don't really want to do that, that's fine. You don't really want to do that. And actually, maybe you would be a cracking entrepreneur if you did want to do that. But you obviously don't, because if you really wanted to, I wouldn't be able to stop you, actually. It's not that I would need to help you. I mean, I could help you, but you would be so determined that you would do it regardless. And so, for me, it's, people are sort of sometimes not quite ready. And they could be ready in the future. But, I spoke with someone very recently. He's in his late 20s, and he has this idea. It's a technology business, and it's a good idea. And he sort of gave me this business plan, explained how it could work, and I said, it's all pretty interesting. He said, I think if I could get this amount of investment, then, that should be enough and it could work. And I said, well, who would run the business? Would you run the business? And he said, well, no. I mean, he works in investment banking, actually, and, sort of well-paid guy. And I said, do you want to be a startup founder? And he said, well, I mean, if it was going well, I could do maybe part-time. I said, well, what does well look like? $1 million a year in turnover. I said, well, how is it going to get to $1 million a year in turnover if you're not working in it? Who is going to work in it? And, it just started to, when the rubber sort of hit the road, it's like, well, no, I actually don't want to leave my job.
Yeah.
And completely fine. If, the guy's looking at buying a home and everything, you'd need the salary to get the mortgage and everything.
Yeah.
Completely understands, makes complete sense. But if that's the case, I wouldn't sort of engage too much in sort of thinking about what being an entrepreneur would be like unless you're really willing to put in the effort. Because, as I demonstrated with my last year, people think that the ideas are what make great businesses. And ideas are everywhere. And ideas generally, unless you're some, advanced physicist or scientist or something, the ideas are generally not that complicated. Facebook, you just took a book of faces that they used to print and you put it online and it just went viral. I mean, the execution is what makes it so effective. And so for me, just because you have a great idea, it's not a responsibility that you need to do something with it. If it's not the right thing for your life, if it doesn't meet your ambitions for what you want to achieve, it doesn't fit your responsibilities, it's completely fine to just put it aside. Maybe you go back to it later when circumstances change. Maybe you don't. But I think, for me, the number one ingredient of success in being an entrepreneur is that you really want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you wait for the perfect moment, you'll just wait forever. Perfect moment never comes.
Yeah, and as a entrepreneur, you understand the commitment that's required, and I think we've talked about a lot of concepts there, but I think the one thing I would like to bring out is that entrepreneurship is not better than anything else. I mean, yes, you can make loads of money, but that's quite difficult and
You
quite
can.
rare.
Most businesses fail, but some are very successful. Yeah.
Right. I mean, the stat the other day, only 8% of UK companies actually achieve £1 million turnover. And when people think about an entrepreneur and earning millions, I mean, I'm talking about turnover, revenue, sales. I'm not even talking about profits. I mean, let's all get excited about that later. I don't even have the stats for you. I'll send it later. But just knowing that you have to be in the top 8% to just turn over seven figures, where we're from a world, private equity, investment bank, corporate finance, whatever the hell you want to call it, we've talked about hundreds of millions as if they're sort of the most common thing in the world, billions of pounds, dollars, euros. But to achieve that is phenomenal. I mean, nothing short of that. It's phenomenal. So, what I want to really bring out is that you need to really commit to the lifestyle that you've chosen,
Yeah.
and to appreciate that you've chosen it. You just sometimes the thinking doesn't catch up to it. But if you want to be like your friend and be a big investment banker and crack on and build your career and become an MD and then maybe a partner and beyond, then choose that, do it, commit to it,
Yeah.
and engage with the process of getting to that level, which is great, by the way. Just because we're advisors to business owners, entrepreneurs, doesn't mean that we think that that's the best route. It just means it's a route of people that we know need our advice.
Absolutely.
Different guys. But if you want to do the entrepreneurship route, don't kid yourself. Create a set of circumstances that mean that you can go ahead and do something about it.
Yeah.
And the people that are in that sort of paralysis moment, potentially they haven't chosen the career path that they know that they should choose, or they haven't committed to doing something about their business, for want of a lack of word, motivation, or potentially even laziness. I mean, not everyone is hardworking. Not everyone's going to push themselves, and that's fine. I mean, work ethic is still a skill set. You either have it or you don't. It's not as far as I know, it's not something that's ingrained in you. It's something that you do because you're motivated to do something. It's not a God-given right or gene. So I find it really fascinating that, and connecting to sort of the reason why we've created this podcast, is because I really want people to engage with their lives, and I really want people to understand the choices that they've made, consciously or subconsciously, to go and achieve what they want to go and achieve. Career, business, or even anything else. I mean, charities and there's a whole bunch of amazing things that you can do, raising great children, whatever it is. But engage with that decision, appreciate the process that you've engaged with, and go and fucking achieve it. I mean, that's it. And entrepreneurship's a really easy way to see that, because you've got the quantifiable elements of the financials, of the KPIs that you and I are used to setting up, but also that to a large extent those things are quite public. You can look at how successful someone's business is in the UK by going onto Companies House, and there's all public ways of looking at people's information, which is again quite scary. But at the same time, that's just a result. If you've committed to doing something and you're trying to achieve it, just do it.
Exactly. I think that's completely right. But in a way, and for me, that's, if I'd known it before, I would have been so much happier. I could have saved myself a year. That you don't need to have everything figured out. All you need to know is, do I really want to do this? And it doesn't mean that you think it would be kind of cool. It'd be kind of cool if you went to Greece for a month. It'd be kind of cool if you bought a fancy car. Doesn't mean that you actually are going to do those things. You just think that it would be like an interesting thing. And it's very different from thinking, I'm in the wrong place with my life. I'm not doing what I'm meant to be doing right here. This is not what brings me satisfaction. And to be honest, my lifestyle has not sort of changed that much from the income. It's changed because I no longer have to sort of be in an office, and all of those things. But it really is not something that I did for the money. It's something that I did because I like working with founders. I often found that founders didn't necessarily always understand all the points that were being discussed because they were sort of, and so just having someone to go in, be the translator, be someone to just help them go through this process just brings me so much satisfaction. And so when there's a good day, well, great. I mean, I'm having a good day, I just signed some extra clients or whatever, and that's great. And I like what I'm doing. And if you're having a bad day, well, this is a tough day, but I still feel like I'm doing absolutely what I'm meant to be doing. And like you said, if it's sort of eyes open, eyes closed, if it's something you really care about, that's the only way you're going to be able to motivate yourself to continue doing that. And so I think, that's the good news, right? Is if someone really wants to do it and they know that, it's really simple. All you need to do is take a single step. It doesn't even need to be in the right direction, right? Because quite often you don't know what that is. So you just need to do something. And even if it's completely wrong, you will have learned something from doing the wrong thing, which will then help you do a better job next time. And you just keep doing that. It doesn't need to be fast. It doesn't need to be right. But you need to begin. Because if you don't begin, the time will pass anyway. And I think that's the ultimate thing that I've taken away is you can do something or you can not do it. But not doing it is the same as doing it wrong. Because the time will pass and you won't have achieved anything.
Yeah.
So your best bet is to just stop. If that's what you want to do and you're committed to it, begin. Just take a deep breath and take the plunge.
Talking about taking the plunge. Perfect phrasing.
There we go.
And I'm good at segues. You are getting married. Congratulations.
Thank you.
To the beautiful Lara. Wonderful. I've had the pleasure of meeting her, spending time with her, going on holiday with both of you. And she's an amazing, intelligent Colombian woman. So you're getting married in Colombia in just a few months.
That's right.
Are you excited?
I'm very excited. It
is being recorded, but we can edit stuff. It's fine.
No, don't worry. I'm really excited. No, I'm really excited. It's been, all my personal changes since starting the business. Actually, I started the business in January. I met Laura in March of the same year. And actually, what a year. And I met her basically just having started. I mean, at that point I had a single client. So, economically I was not terribly secure. Things were very much up in the air. She lived in Madrid. I lived here in London. So, there were lots of sort of stumbling blocks, but when we met, it was sort of just something that it was a whirlwind.
Yeah. And tying back a little bit into the lifestyle change into entrepreneurship and flying to Madrid and spending time there. I think you have a couple of clients in Spain as well. So being able to actually travel on your own sort of guise and design, because of course you own the company, do what you want. Do you think that was a fundamental factor in you being able to spend more time with Laura and ultimately?
Absolutely, without a doubt. Yeah. It completely has changed what I need to prioritize in my life. Because which is just sort of a nature of the entire thing, right? I mean, when you have a job, you generally have to sort of between certain hours be where you were told to be and do what you were told to do, more or less. And fortunately, given the type of work that I do and that I've been able to get some clients in Spain, I've been able to sort of very effectively sort of build in 1 or 2 weeks a month of travel. And she also has sort of a remote job, so she's able to spend a lot of time here in London. So we've been able to spend a lot of time together, but purely just down to the flexibility that comes from, I mean, not all entrepreneurship, but certainly this specific type of sort of more consultancy-based work, particularly you've got clients on the ground there, so you could sort of go and spend time with the clients to sort of, make it into a sort of work travel effectively and have a dual purpose travel. And then similarly that you can sort of control the timing. You know, you don't need to worry about being in the office come Monday morning. You can work remotely. You can do the phone calls. You can get a working space there for a week and just spend a week there. Just do your phone calls and just schedule your meetings for the following week when you're back in London. So, you know, the flexibility and control is completely there. You know, would I pretend for a second that having to split my time between, you know, Spain and Spain and London, and then, you know, various other places with various other clients as well, you know, has that had an impact on the business? Probably. I mean, if I'd spent more time in one place, been more focused, more available for meetings, there probably would have been more opportunities, more clients, etc. But, you know, compared to, you know, the blessing of having met Laura and sort of developed the relationship, I'm very happy to sort of pay that price. And more importantly, it's completely my decision to make that choice. You know, it's not me calling my boss saying, sorry, I mean, I'm going to keep working, but I just need to leave 2 hours early every day because I'm going to be spending time with my future wife. That's not going to work. But that's completely within your gift. If it's a trade that you want to make, you're the only one who can, again, sort of, you're in the driver's seat. You decide what is a trade-off that you want to make and not.
That's one of the indirect benefits of becoming an entrepreneur. I mean, I presume you didn't know that at the time when you set up Everkim & Co, but having that flexibility is obviously a massive pro to being an entrepreneur. And at the same time, because of that flexibility, it enables you to be more open to opportunities. And not all of those opportunities are business. So, what's it like I mean, you're 36, if you don't mind me declaring.
That's right.
What's it like finding love in your mid-30s?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's phenomenal. I think finding love at any age is always, you know, an incredible blessing. So it's a very positive thing. But, you know, it's interesting. I mean, certainly, as I mentioned earlier, you know, working as a younger man in investment banking, you know, the sort of love life was pretty barren. You spend most of your time, the only models I was dealing with were spreadsheet models. So it was, you know, a very sort of work-focused period of my life. You know, very, very little socializing, you know, not a lot of dating. And even after that, you know, I think it's quite easy in London as well to sort of be caught up in just, I mean, it's dating, but you're just playing around. You're not really interested in sort of seeing anyone for that seriously. And the only time that I'd really sort of had a long-term relationship was I dated someone for around 5 years when I was still back in Newfoundland. And actually, it only ended because I left. And
to go to Spain.
To Spain and then to London. And she sort of thought that I was bluffing and that was just sort of me daydreaming. And I sort of said, no, that's absolutely what I've always been planning to do. And I'm doing it. You should come. And, you know, and obviously that was sort of the end of that. But the difference between, you know, a relatively serious relationship then versus now, that was sort of my early 20s. You know, you're so unformed as a person that you're almost like a blank slate, I guess. And so at that point, you know, there was obviously goodwill, there's good wishes for everyone. But even at that early stage, I wanted to go to Europe. And had been saying that for years, and like that hadn't percolated through to the other side, and she had completely different ambitions for her life, and so you go your separate ways.
Apart, yeah.
Whereas now, I think at 36, despite, you know, professionally, obviously this, you know, the business being relatively new, 2.5 years old, you know, I sort of know what I want from my life. I know where I want to live. I know the type of lifestyle I want. And I know the type of partner I'm looking for. And so I think at 36, when you meet someone, yeah, it's probably a blessing and a curse, right? You've got 36 years, you know, a third of a century basically of experience and sort of quirks and sort of idiosyncrasies now built up, and you're sort of much more defined as a person. And so is she. And so, you know, you end up having a few more rough edges that you need to sort of work on to sort of fit together. But you also, I think, have a much clearer vision of what your life together would look like. And so when you find someone and it's a fit, you know, it's not sort of a cozy fit. It's like a glove. You know exactly what you're looking for, and when it's a fit, you really sort of know it and you feel it. And so
I think there's a lot of people now that those who are in their 30s, they've grown up to some extent with the apps, Tinder, Bumble, the rest of it. I don't know many. As a man who was married at 25, 6 years ago, I shouldn't know them, but I do know them peripherally. Um, and the apps are there to try to help you go through that process. Or look, if you've got a busy lifestyle, can spare that 5 or 10 minutes to go through an app and find someone that's profile that matches yours, and if there's a reconciliation of that match, then you can speak to them and hopefully take it from there. Is that when you were sort of in the investment banking world, corporate finance world, just before you set up Evan King Co., was that something that was a genuine option for you? Were you trying to date? Were you trying to meet people? Or was it just work, work, work?
No, I think by that time, I probably sort of after 6-7 years working, you probably start to have enough control over your diary that you can plan, weekends or evenings, dinners, etc. So dating relationships became a lot more possible. And without deep diving into the business model of some of these apps, obviously most people pay them for using the app, for getting matches, either a subscription or whatever, paid super likes or whatever the function is on these apps. And so actually I would argue that the app's job or the app's intent is not really to help you find a long-term relationship so that you stop using the app. It's actually to give you a constant stream of dates so that you continue using the app. And so I think for a long time I was not a paying customer, but I was certainly using these apps and having effectively that experience. You go, you meet someone, oh yeah, she was nice, went to a good school, talked about her job a bit too much, snorted when she laughed. Nah. Like just the most ridiculous things, because you know that tomorrow you could meet someone else. So you just wait for perfection. Perfection is sort of a subjective thing anyway, so really you'll never find it. But actually what you're looking for is just the ego boost that people want to go out with you. And you waste a lot of time doing that, looking back. But fortunately, I actually met Laura the sort of the old analog way. I was bringing some friends of mine to Madrid for the weekend. I lived there when I studied my master's program, and they'd never been, so I brought them for a weekend. And went to a bar and just walked up to her and strangely enough, I asked her how she liked it here in London. She sort of turned around and said, "We're in Madrid." And I said, "Oh." So it wasn't the best opening line, I have to confess, but still, it was the old, a rocky start, but we sort of improved from there. But no, we sort of met in the real world, as it were. And also, I think because she was in Madrid and I was in London, we had to take it seriously. It's not that I'll just see you after work if I don't feel too tired. It's that, okay, I'm going to book tickets and fly to Madrid next week to see you.
Yeah.
And so you're really committed, and so you go there. You're in a different city, or she'd come here, or whatever, and you're more or less responsible for that person while they're here. I mean, they came to see you, so you're not going to blow them off or whatever. And so we ended up being a lot more serious. And I think what I took away from it is a big problem, at least with my experience prior to dating here in London, is people not really that interested. People not that respectful because they're not that interested really in not being single. Maybe for a while, maybe over the winter or whatever, cuffing season, but people generally, it's entertainment. It's something people do to sort of unwind because they don't want to go to dinner alone, or they just want some gossip with their friends, but it's not really something they're really looking for, because looking back, I was not really being serious about it at all. And when I met Laura, it was a real sea change.
Yeah. And do you think that, I know we're going outside of both of our expertises here, but do you think that the apps have been a force for good in terms of dating world and matching people up and maybe getting people together that otherwise wouldn't have perhaps met in that bar in London, come Madrid? And there have been many stories of people actually being able to find each other over an app, swiping left or right. I don't know what the good one is.
I think right is the good one.
Okay.
I remember that much, but I mean, I think it's a slightly complicated situation. I mean, how do I put it relatively briefly? My feeling is at the moment, particularly in this country, but sort of around the world, with the cost of sort of housing, cost of living, all of these things that we're seeing, it's very difficult for people to sort of settle down, get married, and have children. And that's really a big part of married life, is sort of, creating a family life, and so creating a family. And I think when you can't do that, the need to sort of be in a stable monogamous relationship is a lot lower. And so I think the apps are, the technology behind the apps is not particularly impressive. It's, pictures and swiping. So it's like Instagram, but with a heart and an X at the bottom. So the only thing that I really think that it serves is, because people are not able to maybe do these longer term life building activities, these apps have come up with a way to give you volume. Because if you're looking for a spouse or a long term partner, you don't want volume, you want quantity. I don't want 500 potential wives. I want like 5, but real. Not even 5. I really just want 1 because I just want to get married. But if you're sort of out dating and there's 52 weeks a year and you're going to go on 1, 2, 3 dates a week, then I need, at least 50, maybe 150 matches a year. And if you do that, you start sacrificing on the quality. So I think just that's the fact that that's the business model that's based around volume. I think to me sort of tells you all you need to know about how serious it is in terms of sourcing people for long-term relationships. Not to say it never works. I mean, obviously, so many people use these apps that you absolutely can meet your partner through them, and increasingly people do. But, I don't think there's really anything in the platform that sort of filters out and tries to give you a smaller number of more relevant matches. It's more or less just a fire hose, and it's very visual based. So the ones who have the most appealing photos, you just sort of hit as many yeses on those as you can and no's to the rest. And so, I don't think it's revolutionary really in any way, or sort of helping people to find the one. I think it is sort of built to do something slightly different, and that people at the moment are maybe not able to sort of have that stable home life that they would like. And so actually they're quite happy to pursue a more sort of, relaxed or casual form of dating.
Thank you very much for sharing that. We have a tradition on this show,
Uh-oh.
being the first episode. Many traditions. I think they're a tradition if you keep doing them. So I'm hoping if I keep saying we have a tradition,
We're creating the traditions.
We'll have to keep doing them. But of course, you're the first to experience this. And for disclosure, we did actually send this question to you beforehand. But we wanted a nice reflective piece at the end of our discussion. The question is, if your 18-year-old self could talk to its 18-year-old self, what do you think the conversation would be about?
Well, it would have to be about my life. And, I think the 80-year-old would be so excited for the 18-year-old, even at 36, looking back and just about remembering me at 18, coming from this small town on an island, never been on a train. Even the difference between then and now is pretty stark. And, just the things that your ambitions, because you don't understand the world, right? You don't know how things work. And so when you don't know how things work, you obviously don't really know what you should do in the world, because you don't know how it works. So you don't know what anyone does. So how do you know what you should do? And so I think my 80-year-old self would absolutely tell the 18-year-old that, all the things that he'd hoped for, and far more than he'd hoped for, is all going to happen way faster than he thought. The 18-year-old talking to the 80-year-old, I don't know I think he would be a little bit blown away, but for me it would be more the 80-year-old just telling the 18-year-old, I had a lot of anxiety when I was young, the idea that I was just going to leave and sort of go to a brand new country. I didn't know anyone, sort of start a brand new career. It was a massive punt. And so to be able to sort of know up front that actually it's a safe bet, don't worry, it's all going to work out, I think it would be such a relief.
Yeah, because I think the question challenges you, and I think I'm hoping the more and more we ask our guests is that I think you either put yourself in the 18-year-old shoes talking to the 80-year-old, or you put yourself in the 80-year-old shoes talking to the 18-year-old. And if you're the older, you'll presumably be telling words of wisdom and trying to regret anything and just explore things and enjoy yourself and enjoy life and live life to the full and all those kind of key mantras. And the 18-year-old will be curious, how did life pan out? You're 80-year-old and you're coming to the end of your life, and do you have any regrets? And what can I do to, do more things and as you say, move from Newfoundland, because you're sitting in your village of 85 people at that point, not knowing where the hell you're going to be, and being 36 now, even in another 18 years, you're going to be 54. I mean, nowhere near their 80-year-olds, and who knows where you'll be at that point.
Well, exactly. I mean, at 36, presumably I'm still closer to the 18-year-old than the 80-year-old, which, I mean, I can only but pray that things continue to go in the direction that they are. But, I mean, so far it's been, the last, 18 years since I've been 18. So the last 18 years have been an incredible ride. So I hope the rest is, half as good. I'd be thrilled.
Awesome. Well, Mr. King, thank you very much for joining me on the RTA.
A pleasure.
Take care. Thank you very much.
Care.